Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein.
Drum links, 2, 3, drum links, 2, 3, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich heim in die Arbeiter einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades. Welcome to Socialism Saturday. Socialism Saturday is where we take some time out of our week to watch the real far left, the farthest of the far left, the most dystopian of the dystopian. We do not watch the Democrats or to pander to the people who think that Democrats are socialists, because we know that real socialists do not believe that Democrats are socialists. They call them neoliberals. We are not watching the progressives. The progressives are also not socialist. We aren't even watching the Democratic Socialist of America, with rare exception, because the real socialists don't even allow their members to join the Democratic Socialists of America because they think the Democratic Socialists of America are too close to capitalism. On this, we only watch the farthest of the far left, the radical revolutionary socialists. These are the people who are controlling every crazy thing going on in our world today. These are the people who are pushing the college protests that you are seeing all over the country. Now, some people may have been surprised at what they're seeing at the college protests in the last week and a half or so. My community, the people who watch Socialism Saturday with me every single week, have not been surprised at all, because we know these people. We've actually been tracking some of the groups who are coordinating with the students at Columbia, with the students at Harvard, with all of those different groups in order to organize and push the protests all over the country. We have been tracking some of these people for months, if not years. So I really feel like, and as conservatives are running around going, George Soros funded, and they're making all this shit up that has no basis in reality at all. This is the only place on the internet where you're going to be able to see the real far left talk about what they're doing in their own words. Because the people that we watch here are the ones pushing those protests. The people that we watch here are the ones pushing gender ideology in schools. They're the ones pushing attacks on parental rights. They're the ones pushing critical race theory, anti-racist education. They're the ones pushing DEI. They're the ones pushing abolish to the police. They're the ones that are pushing the climate justice stuff. Literally every single crazy thing that is impacting your life is coming from the radical revolutionary socialists that we watch on Socialism Saturday. Naruto says, did you look at the video I sent you last night from the RCA? No, I didn't, Naruto. I apologize. I was taking the night off, and then I couldn't get to sleep last night, and so I made some AI music, okay? I took a little bit of a night off, so I haven't had a chance to look at it. I am aware of it. I do appreciate you sending it on to me, and we're going to talk about that AI music in a little bit, guys, because we do have tonight, before we get started with our main show, we have a very, very special world premiere of the music video for the AI song that I created last night at 4 a.m. I'm very proud of it. Some of you may have already heard it, but that's okay. We're going to wait for a couple more people to file in before we start our world premiere. Floofy Cat, thank you for becoming a member of the channel. I really do appreciate it. All right, let me show you guys what we're watching today. And actually, you know what's funny is I've been wanting to rewatch this one for a while. This is a presentation that we watched way back at the beginning of Socialism Saturday. Way, way back. I want to say this was maybe like the first, second, or third week of Socialism Saturday when we officially started them in 2022, because we've been doing this for a while now. And I've always wanted to come back to this one, and I just, something in me just was, it was like, no, not the right time, not the right time, not the right time. And now is the right time, because I really do think that what we're going to start to see with these protests on college campuses is going to relate directly back to some of the things that were talked about in this presentation. This, of course, is on the YouTube channel of Haymarket Books. Haymarket Books is one of our favorite socialist book publishers. Well, they are the largest socialist book publisher in the United States. They're based out of Chicago. By the way, guys, did you know, and this is separate from the college campus stuff, this was actually going on before the college campus stuff, there is an active campaign on the revolutionary far left to organize massive protests around the Democratic National Convention that's coming up in Chicago in a couple months. And so we need to keep an eye on that. And that very well could be cross-pollinating with the campus protest, because of course there are students at Northwestern already protesting. I'm sure there are other University of Illinois schools that are already protesting. I'm kind of sure, I mean, there must be an encampment at the University of Chicago. Like, I would be quite frankly shocked if there wasn't. But you have all these campus protests going on, and some of those students are going to be staying over the summer. And the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, is literally being held in the same place as the Socialism 2023 conference that I went to last year. And so the far left socialist groups are planning massive organized protests of the DNC, because remember, the real socialists do not like the DNC. I don't know why people or the Democrats rather. I don't know why people on the right are confused about this, because you keep seeing example of this over and over and over and over and over again. When the protesters blocked the street in the State of the Union, when between Biden at the White House and the U.S. Capitol, there was a whole massive demonstration of protesters that were blocking the street, and all people on the right were confused about that, and they were like, "Why is the left protesting the left?" Well, it was the socialists protesting the Democrats. And that happens all the time. We literally see that right now with these campus protests. They're so confused about why the campus protesters are just as angry towards the Democratic Party as they are towards the Republican Party, because socialists do not view Democrats as being on their teams. They view them as neoliberals. They hate Biden. They have never worked with Biden. No, they're not going to vote for Biden either. What they're going to do is cause a metric ton of trouble that's going to spur other people to vote for Biden. We can talk about that another day. Anyway, this is from Haymarket Books YouTube channel. This is actually from back in 2022, and it features one of our favorite Abolish the Family socialists, Emmy O'Brien, and it is called On Political Violence, Fascist Mobilization, and Queer and Trans Self-Defense. Now, you're going to see it's from a magazine called Pinko. Pinko is a magazine that Emmy O'Brien edits. Pinko is a queer Marxist magazine. One of the things that socialists do in terms of disseminating their ideology is they create a ton of like periodicals, like actually really nice printed stuff. I'll tell you that. Like, I have some of them. They're very high quality printed paper with like articles and essays. They have digital copies of it too. You pay a subscription fee in order to be able to get them. I'm signed up to a couple of them because I like having socialist propaganda. Anyway, this is one of the ways that they disseminate their ideas out to the world is they create these periodicals and then they work with each other to kind of promote each other's periodicals. And Pinko is one of the periodicals. It is the Queer Marxism one. They are the sponsors of this webinar with Haymarket Books. You'll also see Pinko at the Socialism Conference, or at least I did last year. They're very involved with each other. The description is, for most of the left, political violence is a forbidden topic. But at the moment, queer and trans people face the real threat of violence from a growing movement of armed fascists in America. How can we think about this, and what steps are necessary to defeat them? What do existing projects to keep us safe have to teach us? So it's going to be great. Honest Dog Al, 3 new zine flyers in the Discord. Honest Dog, have you heard my song yet? I'm starting a music division of the Unwoke Underground, but I'm excited about those zine flyers too. And by the way, guys, Human Centipede and I were talking about this over DM earlier today. Human Centipede has a theory, and quite frankly, I was formulating the same theory at exactly the same time, so I'm glad that he was the one that said it, because I think he's right about this. We need to look into the far left anarchist zines, the queer anarchist zines that they're producing. And that, of course, will help us inform our own zine project. But Human Centipede and I think that these zines, the anarchist ones, are far more influential on what radical queer Marxists are doing in culture today than the Marxism stuff and the Mao stuff. And it's like, we were talking about this earlier this week, where I'm starting to formulate a hypothesis. We're calling it Marxism gain of function, where it's not as though the Marxist activists in the world today aren't inspired by Marx and aren't inspired by Mao, but there's been some sort of weird mutated strand. Like something has happened. Like the Marxist and Maoist influences have been mutated by queer anarchist literature. And the reason that we say that is the more that we listen to these zines, these anarchist zines, like the more relevant it is to what we see going on in the world. In fact, sometimes there's just like a direct translation between the anarchist zine and what we see the activists saying in the real world. And I was telling Human Centipede earlier today, I distinctly remember, and I don't remember what presentation she did this in, I distinctly remember Emmy O'Brien saying that she was into queer anarchist subculture. We have to find this clip of her because she actually talks about being involved in this. And so I think there's some there. We've got to go into the anarchist scenes, and quite frankly, I think that's going to be really interesting for us. So we're going to be taking a look at that this week, and I think it's going to be great. Thank you, Descendant of Loki, gifted 5 memberships to the channel. Reagan got one, Dracos, Kyle, T-Bone, Mad Hatter. Congratulations to everyone who got a membership. I do appreciate you, Descendant of Loki. Thank you. Human Centipede says the zines are real-time look into the socialist consciousness. So the zines are going to tell us what is going on in this underground subculture today, in the same way that these trainings do. But I mean, the zines are even a more kind of like organic thing. And luckily, Human Centipede's been doing just a great job of like sourcing this material, finding audio recordings of this material. So it's not like we all have to sit down and read it. We can listen to it together on video. It might not be like an interview or something, but it's good enough so far as I'm concerned. I think it's going to be great. I think it's going to be really inspiring. And do you know who hasn't done any of this? James Lindsay. James Lindsay has never looked into the queer anarchist scenes, even though he wrote a whole book about queer Marxism and queer activism and how it's impacting you. He never looked into the queer anarchist subculture. This is why James Lindsay and I have such a different perception of queer, because I have inadvertently been showing you stuff from the queer activist subculture for like years. I just didn't put 2 and 2 together. I thought I made the incorrect assumption that James's cherry-picked papers would align with what's going on in the real world, but it doesn't. And that's because what's going on in the real world has been mutated through Marxism gain of function by the queer anarchist subculture. I'm absolutely positive of this. There is no doubt in my mind. Dog Whistle Daniel asked if I've looked into communism in Europe and South Africa. I'm going to be very blunt. I only look at what's going on in the United States. There's only so much I can do at one time. I cannot go outside of the United States unless there is a really damn good reason for it. If other people want to look at how what is going on in the United States mirrors what's going on in Europe and South Africa, I would be totally supportive of that. I just can't do it because I'm already stretched to like the absolute like max. But I appreciate the thought, and I hope someone else picks that up. We're going to talk more about James in a second, but before we get to that, I want to just remind people that if you do want to support the work I'm doing, the very best way to do so is by heading over to my Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. Of course, I have been closely following the protests that have been going on this week. We've been talking about them a lot on the channel. I have been streaming a lot. I have a couple articles up on the Substack. There's going to be more going up later tonight. Hopefully, fingers crossed. We talked about USC canceling their graduation. We talked about the attack of the sprinklers at Harvard. We talked about why college protesters are wearing masks, because it might not be what you think it is, because it's not to hide their identity. That's like a bonus, but it's not actually why they do it. So if you want to understand the mindset of the socialist and why they are still wearing masks and why they actually really do believe they need to, it's not just a mask to like hide their face. They actually believe they need to do this. Head over to the Substack. I have an article about that. We talked this week about Kent State and the mirrors of what happened at Kent State and what we're already seeing with these college protests. It is my opinion that the college protesters are trying to recreate Kent State in real time. I think they want someone to get shot. I think they want to be martyred in order to elicit a mass nationwide unrest that's going to happen all summer. And on top of that, we did a queer liberation training that was 2 days. And I recorded the whole thing. We did it live for my supporters. But if you missed it because, maybe you have a real job or something like that, and you can't sit around all day watching queer liberation training, you're in luck. They're on demand. You can watch them anytime. Just head over to the Substack, access that information. If you just go into the paid section of either of those posts, Queer Liberation Training Access Day 1 or Day 2, you will currently find the on-demand links. I will be making some clips of that as well. It has been one hell of a busy week, and it's not done yet. Anyway, guys, if you do want to support the work I'm doing and keep me in business, because I am 100% grassroots funded entirely by you, your money helps buy the time that it takes me to do all this stuff. I work about 12 to 16 hours a day thinking about nothing but socialism just for you, so you don't have to. So you can head over to my Substack and sign up for a membership of $8 a month, $80 a year. I really would appreciate it. That's going to get you access to a variety of perks. That includes 2 Zoom calls with me every single week on Monday and Wednesday. It includes access to the supporter-only Discord. And every Sunday on the supporter-only Discord, we do movie night. Now, movie night normally starts at 8 p.m. Eastern time, but tomorrow we're starting earlier, and I need everyone that wants to go to movie night to remember this. I mean, I guess you could show up anytime, but tomorrow night we are starting movie night at 6 p.m. And the reason is we're doing a double feature. We are watching the original Hunger Games, and then we're watching the sequel to the original Hunger Games. So we're doing a two-parter. It's going to be a long-ass movie night. You're welcome to come and go as you please. But because the movies are so long and we are doing a double feature, I don't know who thought this was a good idea. Probably Jennifer, but I co-signed it. It seemed like a better idea at the time. Anyway, we'll be watching Hunger Games 1 and 2 tomorrow night in my supporter Discord. I do hope you can join us. And again, if you want access information to that, what's going to happen is tomorrow I'm going to be sending out an email on the Substack. Let me find one that looks a little bit like this. It's not this email because it's going to be tomorrow's email. And in this email, when you get it, what I need you to do is scroll all the way down the bottom. And underneath that red box, you're going to find your links and access information for all the supporter perks, to include the supporter Discord. One last thing, guys, if you want to support my work, another way you can do so is by heading over to the Unwoke Art merch store. Now, I can't believe it's already the end of May or the end of April. And the limited edition Unwoke Wiki shirt is about to leave the store because I do a new limited edition shirt every single month. This was April's edition of the Unwoke Wiki shirt. You can still get this for a couple more days. I think it looks pretty rad. The Unwoke Wiki project is something that we're doing to try to catalog all this stuff and get everything in one place. And it's an epic project that, I mean, Reagan's been helping out with it. Bot's been helping out with it. I got to get back to inputting stuff in the Unwoke Wiki because it really is. This is going to be our database to track the socialist revolution in real time. But also, it's just fun to have cool merch, and the Plague Doctor is the mascot of the Unwoke Wiki. So every month I do a different Plague Doctor t-shirt. Now, I think what I'm going to be doing is after, like, once we get to June, I think I'm going to re-release all of the shirts for this year just to give people another chance to pick up the limited edition one. So, you know, if you have one of the shirts that maybe you missed one or you want to go back and get one, that is going to become available again. I'm going to do every once in a while a limited release of all the Unwoke Wiki designs just because I think they're really cool. But if you want to get your April one right now, you've only got a couple more days to do it. And that helps to fund the work I'm doing. And I really do appreciate it. All right. Now, before we get started with Socialism Saturday, I have a very special world premiere music video because I couldn't sleep last night. And after about 2 hours of trying to go to sleep, I decided to get up and screw around on the internet. And so around 4 a.m. last night, I made my first ever AI music song. And, you know, I've never made an AI music song before, and I was a little nervous about it, but I do like AI art, and I was like, well, why not play around with this? This could be something really cool. And I'm thrilled to say that I'm just very happy with the output of it. And do you guys mind if we just take a minute and I premiere the song for all of you before we get started with socialism? Like, do you guys mind? Can you guys all mount the like button for me if you would like me to do the world premiere of the AI song right now? All right, well, we're going to do it regardless of whether you want to or not. This song is called Gnostic Sex Cult. And let's just do it. Okay, world premiere in progress. Let's go.
Tells us queer liberation means the annihilation of capitalism. Catch up, change, whiteness means capitalism. Queer theory hates capitalism. Whiteness means capitalism. Queer theory hates capitalism. Whiteness means capitalism. It's all about capitalism. Everyone knows it's capitalism. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, change. It's capitalism. Whoa. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, change. It's capitalism. It's all about capitalism. Everyone Everyone knows it's capitalism. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, James, it's capitalism. It's capitalism. To pocket all that money from the mills for liberty. The left hates capitalism, but James won't admit it. He refuses to believe queer theory stabilizes normativity, gender binary, and the nuclear family. But James blocks the truth, smears people who try to show him, creates an echo chamber for himself to reinforce his fantasy. Is to believe in something. What happens for liberty? Gnostic sex cult Militancy world. Gnostic sex cult unhinged from reality. He's totally lost it. What can we do but mock him relentlessly?
So that is the world premiere of Gnostic Sex Cult. And for those of you who are thinking, I really want that on Spotify or iTunes, it will be. In fact, earlier today, I submitted it for Spotify and iTunes, but apparently it takes like a week to get on there. So sit tight. Don't worry. It's going to be on Spotify. James is going to be thrilled. And I really feel like I've inadvertently discovered another tool that we can use in our fight against the far left. Yep, I'm obviously going to win a Grammy. Yep. So I feel like when I submitted the video the song to Spotify and iTunes, I had to name my own record company, and it basically said it was like just make it up, and I was like I called it Unwoke Anthems, and so this could be a start of a whole Unwoke music division. In which we can make more songs about James. We can make songs about capitalism. We can make songs about our favorite socialists. We can literally make songs about everything. How great is this? Anyway, I hope you guys like the song. I am very happy about it. And yeah, I mean, you could argue okay, so 1 in the chat if you think my song is better than Tim Pool's music, 2 in the chat if you think Tim Pool's music is better than my song. Let me know. Let me know if AI is better than Tim Pool or not. I think that would be, yes, we should definitely do this. I mean, listen, man, like here's the thing. It's like, why aren't we using the tools that are available to us? We have to, and it's so easy. Like anyone can do this. Anyone can make a great song. And then we can use this to spread ideas and stuff. Next song idea, capitalism, fuck yeah. Lots of ones in the chat. So therefore, my song about James Lindsay being a Gnostic sex cultist is obviously better than Tim Pool's music. So that's really validating for me, guys. I really do appreciate that. All right. Now, with everything out of the way, let's turn to business. Let's get serious. We are watching today for Socialism Saturday. We are watching On Political Violence, Fascist Mobilization, and Queer and Trans Self-Defense. Oh, you're right. I could do a love song about Sophie. We could do a whole song about the Mills for Liberty. You can do it in whatever music style you want. So it could be a death metal song. Why not? Anyway, you want to do Unwoke interpretive dance, Lisa? I mean, that's an idea. Go for it. Tolkien fan, it's definitely better than Tim. I appreciate that. Before we get started, how far along is the Unwoke? Yo, we got a long way to go on the Unwoke wiki. I think with the Unwoke, and we already have a bunch of stuff in there already. We have there is a lot of stuff already in there. But what I will say is, like, and Reagan and Bach can attest to this, it's like once you start going down the rabbit hole of like all the different socialist groups and all the connections, it is I did not realize how immense of an undertaking this was going to be. And so we need to consider the Unwoke Wiki a long-term project, because one of the things we need to do is set it up in the correct way so that we can input the name of an activist and it shows all the organizations that they're affiliated with. And that piece in and of it, or we can put in an organization and we see all the activists that are affiliated with it. Like, just that component of it, it takes a lot of time to do. And yes, we need to get like there's so much stuff. It, like, you guys have no idea. Like, I knew there was a decentralized web of radical revolutionary socialists all over the country. I did not realize how large it was. Okay? And so we are working on it. But it's just going to be considered to be a long-term project, because it's one of those things that, like, you can't understand what you're getting into until you're into it. But I do think it's going to be incredibly valuable. Can AI make a dance crew? I mean, I don't know. I'm sure. Well, there is AI video. I've never made an AI movie before, so maybe. I guess we'll see. Anyway, everyone, I need everyone to focus, because we are here tonight to watch a video about on political violence. Now, is anyone here new to Socialism Saturday? I'm not going to go through all the rules for Socialism Saturday because I'm kind of tired of doing it. But if you are new to Socialism Saturday, welcome. We're really glad you're here. If you've only watched an episode or two of Socialism Saturday, what I want you to hear is that watching socialism with me can be a little overwhelming, because socialism is a lot. What we are very literally doing is immersing ourselves in a foreign language and a foreign culture to better understand that culture. And so if you're relatively new and you feel like you're overwhelmed and you feel like you don't know what's going on, that's totally fine. You are exactly where you should be. But what we need you to do is ask questions. And let us help you. Let us teach you. Let us bring you along. The more questions you ask, the more you're going to learn. I am open to answering any question that's asked in good faith. I will be monitoring the chat on YouTube, on Twitter, on Rumble. I have it up on my screen as well. So please don't be shy about asking it. Every single one of us was a beginner once. And so we want to help each other learn. Floofy Cat already in with the question. Do these tendrils of socialism spread throughout the industries in the US? Yes. Yes, they do. Now, the one that we're most focused on is education, both higher education and public schools. But yeah, they spread everywhere. Guys, remember, you're going to hear socialists say a lot of crazy things. We don't want to spend any time and energy debunking them, because yes, you can debunk every single point that they're saying, but that's not the point. Debunking them is not going to solve the problem. The goal here is to understand them, and every ounce of energy you spend debunking them is an ounce of energy you don't spend understanding them. And we cannot defeat an enemy that we don't understand. Just because you listen to someone doesn't mean you have to agree with them. All right, it's perfectly fine. Lastly, rules of the chat do apply. Rules of the chat are: don't be a dick. You will not insult me. You will not insult other people in the chat. I can do whatever I want because you are in my house. No one is saying you have to be here. You have to consider yourself to be in a class right now. I am the teacher of the class. You are the student in the class. And you don't have to like me. You don't have to like my teaching style. But as long as you're in my class, you're going to follow my rules. Do not insult me. Do not insult other people. And if I ask you to stop doing something, that leads us into rule number 2, which is no whining. I don't want to hear it. Okay, I don't have kids for a reason. I certainly don't want adults whining and complaining because they're not getting coddled or they're not getting their way. All right, ask good questions. That's all I'm asking. Let's learn some stuff. We are watching On Political Violence, Fascist Mobilization, and Queer and Trans Self-Defense.
Hello, everyone. I'm Emmy O'Brien, and I'm very excited about the event here tonight. It's being organized, hosted by Haymarket, and supported by them, and organized and hosted by Pinko Magazine. I'll tell you a little bit about Pinko and some of our thinking for the event, And then I'll read the bios for our great speakers tonight, and then ask a series of questions of each speaker, and then we will open it up and have a more open conversation in the panel.
T-Bone Man asked, have we seen this person before? Yeah, Emmy O'Brien is a staple on Socialism Saturdays. Emmy O'Brien is an abolish the family socialist. She is best friends with Sophie, or they them is best friends with Sophie Lewis. So yeah, we've seen her several times.
At some point, people can put in your own questions on YouTube, and we will try to interview.
Yes, Emmy is actually okay, so technically Emmy is a queer Marxist, okay? So technically Emmy is a they them, but Emmy's proper name is Michelle, and Emmy does have a kid. I know that because I've heard they them talk about it. So female.
Great those as the program goes on. So PINKO is a collective for thinking gay communism together. We publish 2 print issues so far, periodic zines, and host irregular essays, translations, and archival material on our website, pinko.online. This is the second in an event series we're doing this fall, specifically on the current political attacks on queer and trans people. For most of the left, political violence is a forbidden topic. But at this moment, queer and trans people face the real threat of violence from a growing movement of armed fascists in America. How can we think about this, and what steps are necessary to defeat them? What do existing projects do to keep us safe, and what do they have to teach us?
Yeah, Emmy published I think she's published a couple books with Pluto Press. Pluto Press is another socialist book publisher.
So that's our formulation of the event. The other members, editorial team at PINKO, played very instrumental and active roles in conceptualizing and organizing this event. I'll add a little bit about my own thinking in doing this to help get us started. Often the really valuable skills, experience, and organization around militant self-defense is pretty isolated to a relatively small group of revolutionaries in specific segments of working class life. I grew up in the 90s in Oregon when the neo-Nazi movement was very large, and there was a vibrant, sharp skinhead scene that engaged in violent confrontations with Nazis. And there was always a political dynamic with whether they were completely isolated from the segments of the anti-fascist movement that would not engage in self-defense in any meaningful way. So at different historical moments, broader self-defense was taken up by a broader segment of the working class as part of integrated mass movements. And we know some of the history of the Black Panthers and other periods in history when this has happened.
All right, pop quiz for the chat. CM is relatively new, so this is a great opportunity. How do socialists define fascist? What is the socialist definition of fascism? And I actually do have clips on my Substack in the video vault that speaks to this specifically. I think I also put them on my YouTube channel. So there are clips to back this up from various leftist events that we've seen. How do socialists define the word fascist? Capitalism. Capitalist. Free market capitalism is the socialist definition of fascism. Fascism means capitalist. As a reminder, capitalism means private property ownership. Your home, your land, your apartment rental, your business, your intellectual property, your parental rights, your individual liberties. Anyone who believes in capitalism means fascist. Capitalists. The fascists are the evil capitalists. It really does take, it makes you look at all the protests where they're calling out the fascists in a new way once you understand exactly what they're saying. And some people claim to understand this. They're like, oh, I know that's obviously what it means. But do you really? Do you really understand that if you believe that you have the right to own a private home, that the socialist left considers you, not anyone who's not a socialist. No, that's not the correct answer. These things have specific definitions. Socialists really do believe that anyone who wants to own a private home, fascist. Anyone that wants parental rights, fascist. So that's what it means. Yeah, I'd prefer if you didn't insult her too. It's really rude, and it, like, guys, let me just like spell it out. Every once in a while, I do actually want to be able to bring socialists on this channel, and if they look at my chat and they see you being just an overt dick to them for no good reason, they're not going to want to come on. So please don't do that. You can talk about their ideas. I don't care about that, but there's no reason. Do you know why people don't want to vote for conservatives? Because conservatives are unnecessarily dickish all the time, and it's very, very off-putting. General rule of thumb, if it has a negative connotation, it is capitalist and must be abolished. Yeah, T-Bone, that's a really good way to put it, because of course the number one enemy of the left is capitalism, and so every single thing they do does lead back to capitalism. However, what I want people to understand is there are nuances in the different words. So there is a metric ton of words that all mean capitalism, but we need to understand the different nuanced perspectives. Like if we say the gender binary, that means that capitalism created the gender binary, which put men in the workforce, women in the home. If we say that they believe that colonization, colonialism is a form of capitalism, imperialism, that's about imposing the impressive force of capitalism on indigenous land. So it is important that we do learn the nuances, because it just matters when you start listening to them in context.
In our planning for this event and talking about it, Melissa Giora-Grant, one of our panelists, told a story, sort of describing a shift on the ground of liberal activists, pro-gay activists, or people who previously might really distance themselves from militants or revolutionaries.
All good, bro. We're cool. Don't worry about it. Just move on.
Suddenly finding themselves relying on anti-fascists, experienced anti-fascist activists, to be able to attend an event or walk to their car when events were being targeted by fascists around attacking queerness and trans life. And so that dynamic of sort of this moment of self-defense.
No, this is not true. Just because someone is an abolish the family activist doesn't mean they don't have kids. Emmy O'Brien has a kid. Emmy O'Brien still wants to abolish the nuclear family, because socialists believe that the nuclear family upholds capitalism. So it doesn't matter that they have kids. They believe that their kids should be raised by the collective. What you need to understand is that, and by the way, most of them do not own homes. That is actually true. I'm sure there are socialists that own homes, but the vast majority of socialists that I've even heard talk about this is because they're renters. They openly like talk about renting and having a landlord and stuff like that. They don't believe that landlords should actually exist. And they don't believe in private property ownership. So that's why a lot of them don't buy a home. But in regards to kids, they do still have kids. But what you guys have to understand is that they put their ideology ahead of everything. And they, unlike conservative Christians, no offense, conservative Christians are a lot of them. I won't say all of them, because of course there are exceptions, but a lot of conservative Christians are really hypocritical. They profess that they have these Christian beliefs, but then they don't act Christian at all. So it is just like, it's like a performative exercise. I make the comparison because with socialists, it's not the same thing. It's not performative for them. They do actually believe that the rules that they're trying to impose on other people should actually apply to them. So they believe that their children should be raised by the community, just like all children should be raised by the community. Now, that's not the world they live in yet, but they're not afraid of that. They actually think that that would be a positive thing. Does that make sense? Well, she has to participate in a capitalist society. What they would say is they don't have any choice right now. They have to participate in a capitalist society, and so they kind of make the best of it, but they live their values as much as they possibly can. And even if they're participating in capitalism, the focus of their energy and attention is on using the resources they gain under capitalism to overthrow capitalism, which is acceptable.
Being looked at, being considered, being taken seriously more broadly is one of the reasons that I was really excited about doing this event and trying to think about, if we're in a moment right now that self-defense could become salient for a much broader range of people. And if the skills of people on this panel and people that we're in touch with might be useful in trying to think about that. Okay, now I'll read the bios, and I'll read them in the order of who I'm going to ask questions of. So Melissa Gira Grant is a staff writer at the New Republic, the author of Playing the Whore, the Work of Sex Work, published by Verso, and an excellent book, I'll add.
Yes,
and the co-director of They Won't Call It Murder, executive produced by Field of Vision. She has reported on violence resistance to police killings in Columbus.
I was on their side,
and the
but not on mine.
global movement for sex worker rights. She's currently at work on a new book, A Woman is Against the Law, Sex, Race, and the Limits of Justice in America, to be published by Little Brown and Company.
Hang on, we got a question in the chat from Space Jack. I don't recognize you, so welcome to Socialism Saturday. Do their protests actually get violent when attacked by fascists, or are they talking about misgendering and seeing signs they don't like? Okay, so with the Colombia protests, right? You know how the president of Colombia authorized the police to go in and arrest people at Colombia? That's considered to be violence from fascists, because they believe the leadership of Columbia University are fascist. They also believe that the police are fascist. They believe that the police are the managers of private property. Socialists are behind all of the defund the police initiatives, abolish the police, abolish the prison industrial complex, things like that, because they believe that the police are the enforcers of fascism. So that's one of the things they might mean in terms of like getting violently attacked by fascists is literally like the university calling the police. And by the way, that's why it's stupid to do it, by the way, because every single time one of these universities calls the police on these protesters, it's actually just going to get worse. Like, they may be able to clear out the camp for a little while, but I promise you, you've just you've like kicked the hornet's nest, and they're going to come back at some point, and it's going to be this is exactly what happened with Colombia. The Colombia protests probably would have fizzled out relatively quickly if they hadn't allowed the NYPD on campus. After they allowed the NYPD on campus, which was the first time since 1968 the NYPD had been allowed on campus, if they hadn't done that, like, the protests would probably be over now. But what happened when they let the police on campus was it literally quadrupled in size, the protest. So that's usually what they mean. It could also mean anyone coming into their encampment that is not aligned with them politically. So anyone who doesn't agree with them is going to be considered a fascist. Anyone that believes in like capitalism, private property ownership, is not a radical far leftist is going to be considered a fascist. Even the Democrats are going to be considered fascist. Like there was this Democrat mayor in Denver, Colorado, that went on to one of the encampments out there, and he got called a fascist by all the socialist protesters, and he was like all confused about this. Like, why are they calling me a fascist? Well, they're calling you a fascist because socialists very literally believe that Democrats are fascist. So, I hope that answers your question. No, we didn't, but I'll talk about that this week, but I'm not going to talk about it right now, but thank you. Yeah, you guys, like, there are a couple things coming up in the next week that people should be aware of. Number one, Wednesday is May Day. And I'm hopeful that our friends at Red May are going to get their shit together. Where is Philip? Where is my Red May schedule? Red May is like Christmas for the radical revolutionary socialists in Seattle. They've been doing Red May for years. Philip hasn't even announced the schedule for Red May yet. May 1st is on Wednesday. I really feel like Philip is letting us down. Maybe Sean, the most handsome of all socialists, can go and remind Philip to put out the goddamn Red May schedule so that we can organize around that. However, what I want to say here is that May Day is May 1st. This is considered to be like basically a socialist holiday, like commemorating the struggle for revolution. And so be on the lookout for socialist events, protests, like on Wednesday. I would not go near any of these college campuses on Wednesday. I'll tell you that right now. I would stay the F away. That's just my opinion. Also, May 4th, which is next Saturday, is the anniversary of the Kent State shootings. And remember, I really do think that these socialists are trying to like recreate the Kent State shootings on campus. So just be aware of that in the following week. Rottweiler says, new rule proposal. If you're a conservative, leave your assumptions aside. These people aren't aborting themselves out of the gene pool. They do have kids. I mean, that's a really good point, guys. Listen, I know that I give a lot of conservatives a hard time. Like, admittedly, I've made shitting on conservatives into an art form. But what I will say is I actually do have more sympathy for like conservatives than people might think, because they've been lied to by their influencers. The reason that the reasons that conservatives have so many misperceptions about socialists is because their influencers have done a horrible job of teaching them. So if you've come here and you're relatively new and you listen to people like Mark Levin or Charlie Kirk or any of like the tip Jack Posobiec or Jesse Kelly, all these people who pretend to be experts in socialism, but they never actually listen to them, you might have learned some things that are wrong. Now, I don't mean to break your heart. I don't mean to destroy your perception of your favorite influencer, but this is primary source content, okay? This is coming directly from the horse's mouth. And I guarantee you that none of the conservative influencers that you guys have listened to have ever even watched this content. All right, so come with an open mind, be prepared to unlearn some things, and it'll go a whole lot smoother for everyone.
LV is a communist living in Los Angeles. She organized the Bashback
Antifa.
Denver and the 2010 Bashback Convergence, as well as a number of militant queer groups in Los Angeles, such as Trans Liberation LA, Trans Undocumented Rapid Response Network, or CHURN, and the 2014 Queer Apocalypse. She is a practicing conflict mediator and developing an eco-defense video game. Sheila T is a huge nerd and trans feminine person and anarchist living in Philadelphia. She's been practicing an anarchist and queer struggles since around 2010. Max, they, them, is a community organizer in Sacramento, California.
So we were talking about the queer anarchist scenes earlier. LV is a queer anarchist. Sheila T is a queer anarchist. I'm pretty sure Max is also a queer anarchist.
Usually.
And Emmy O'Brien, I'm pretty sure, is a queer anarchist. Like, the only one who isn't, I don't think, is Melissa. Melissa is a little bit more of a normie.
It revolves around the abolition of prisons and private property, but they have been an active organizer against platforms of far-right extremism and Christo-fascism for many years. So we're very excited to have these panels.
Hang on, another super chat. Thank you, guys. Super chats do help to support the work I'm doing. Amelia says, what bums me out is that Charlie Kirk is not a dumb person at all. I think a lot of influencers know they're misleading to some extent, and they don't care. Influencers care about two things. They care about money, and they care about status. And that's it. And they may somewhat believe that the problems that they're talking about are real problems, but don't ever expect an influencer to try to do anything to solve the problems, because the minute the problem gets solved, they lose their money and they lose their status. And those are their primary objectives: money and status.
And thank you all for being here tonight. So I wanted to open with a sort of broad overview and asking Melissa, could you give us an overall picture of nationally of the fascist upsurge and the attacks on anti-queer and anti-trans people?
Sure. Thank you so much also to Pinko and to
Beth with the big super chat. Thank you, Beth. I appreciate it. Beth says, I appreciate it, Carlin. It took a while to get through to me, so I do sympathize with them, but also get frustrated with them. Beth is talking about conservatives. Your ability to connect the dots and discern between the various factions is amazing and always garners my respect. Thank you, Beth. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate you, and I appreciate your support. Thank you so much for being a very valued member of the community, Queen Beth.
Market for doing this. These are the questions that have been on my mind all summer, all year. So this couldn't be better timed. I feel like I've spent the last year doing nothing but following these attacks, and there's way more than I could possibly summarize in the time that we have here. So I thought what I would do is sort of talk about the pattern and then talk about a couple of specific attacks that I think illustrate this pattern. So the pattern, as I've seen it, sort of honed over the last 2 years, we have individuals mobilizing across the US, often unaffiliated with any well-known far-right group, influenced by propaganda that's being shared by popular social media accounts. So this is not happening on like the fringes of the internet. That propaganda demonizes LGBTQ people as dangers to children. And then these individuals terrorize libraries, schools, hospitals, churches, other community spaces that are welcoming to queer and trans people. And then they document the ensuing pushback and conflict as evidence that they themselves are victims under attack by some powerful lobby, which is a very classic fascist move, to position yourself as the victim in the violence that you've instigated, and to over-exaggerate the power of the people that you're actually doing violence against. So I'm going to focus on how we're seeing these forms of mutually reinforcing violence, where we see these fascist formations that are mostly in particular cities or sometimes networked across the country, and how that's connected with elected officials who are working at the local, state, and federal level, and how those different groups are reinforcing these messages and driving this violence in tandem. So here's 2 examples of what look like they could be disparate attacks that happened over the course of 3 months, but I think they show how all these attacks are linked, who coordinates them, and then who the boots on the ground are, as it were. So I'm going to start in Dallas this June. There's a group there called Protect Texas Kids.
Hang on. Janet says, just listen to this song. Very creative. Here's my donation till it's available on iTunes. Thank you, Janet. I appreciate that. This was recorded in November 2022. Oh, Melissa was working for the Biden administration? Seriously? So guys, this was back in November 2022, and apparently since then, Melissa, the woman who's speaking now, Bot is on her Twitter right now, went to work for the Biden administration, and she tweeted, Bot, when did she tweet this? Today I resign from the Biden-Harris administration. I cannot represent an administration that systematically dehumanizes Palestinians and enables, I'm guessing that's going to be genocide. Fascinating. Bro, I know you're not the brightest crown in the box, but what you need to do is sit your ass down, zip it, and listen to what's going on, because you're not quite caught up with what's going on and you're making yourself look ridiculous. So if you continue to make yourself look ridiculous and disrupt my chat, you're just going to be removed. So zip it, mouth shut, ears open, and you might actually learn something, and you might learn how this is not actually what we're doing.
Pretty new group, and it's headed by a self-described Christian fascist whose name is Kelly Neidert. I might be pronouncing that incorrectly. I have not met her. She organized a protest of a family-friendly drag show, along with other individuals and white nationalist groups who showed up as well. And what they did is they surrounded the club holding the event, Mr. which was in like a gay neighborhood in the suburb of Dallas. They chanted groomer at the families and kids who were lining up on the sidewalk to get into the event. They got up in their faces. One of them was waving a Christo-fascist or Christian nationalist flag. And the children are just standing in line there, plugging their ears with their fingers as white nationalists are yelling at them and their parents about child rape through a megaphone. And what's one guy who was captured on a video said, "The fist of Christ will come down on you very soon," while screaming again at this scene of kids and their parents. So for hours.
This is a white nationalist asshole who is so retarded, he thinks that my Irish, British, French ass is Jewish because I'm not pandering to his racist, ridiculous bullshit. And I told him he had one more chat before I was going to remove him. And that'll do it. Goodbye, loser. The groypers are actually much more subtle than that most of the time. There are far more toxic people on the dissident right than the groypers. I'll tell you that. And I'm pretty sure that guy was from the far more toxic group than the groypers.
This went on. Some of them were reciting sidewalk prayers, sort of reminiscent of anti-abortion groups outside clinics. Some of them directly threatened people, followed them to their cars, and then recorded themselves in these confrontations that they instigated. And then a little more than 48 hours later, Tucker Carlson was airing heavily edited versions of these videos in a segment that he introduced with Just Another Weekend in Weimar. And Texas Republican lawmakers shortly after pledged to introduce legislation to ban drag shows in the presence of minors, with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert, the federal representatives, voicing their support. So Protect Texas Kids announced this rally by sharing a post about the event from the Libs of TikTok Twitter account. It has 1.4 million followers. They often share, flyers for drag events. They share videos from TikTok and other places of queer and trans folks. They really like honing in on librarians, educators, like anybody that they think is like a bad influence on children, essentially. And they're a really powerful sort of mobilizer because they have this huge audience. So they shared this flyer. Protect Texas Kids shared the flyer, had the date, location, and there was part of this mega drag thread. There's lots of, these events that Libs of TikTok is like regularly pushing out to their audience. One of the other things Libs of TikTok has been doing is targeting hospitals that provide gender affirming care to young people. After this campaign, multiple bomb threats were made to the Boston Children's Hospital at the end of the summer. Libs of TikTok also amplified threats that were made in September by the Daily Wire blogger and podcaster Matt Walsh. He claimed he was investigating a pediatric gender affirming care clinic at the Children's Hospital at Vanderbilt University in Tennessee. And in another tactic reminiscent of anti-abortion groups, Walsh just singled out the doctors by name. And almost immediately, Tennessee Republican Governor Bill Lee joined Walsh's call for an investigation into the hospital, followed closely by Tennessee Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn, and said, let's hope they act immediately to stop this crime. And the hospital, after being harassed and threatened after this, removed the clinic's page from their website. So a couple days after this, Protect Texas Kids is back. They don't go all the way to Tennessee. They found another drag event at a church in Texas, which is like a queer affirming church that had this like drag closet for kids. And, it was a place where they could get clothes that suited them, particularly if like their families like weren't supporting them. The church was a supportive place for them. And they were doing a drag bingo fundraiser for this like trans kids program. This little church in Katy, Texas, Steve Bannon talks about it on his program. He promotes this protest, has a guest on who calls the protest a spiritual battle, and that the goal of it was to stop parents from supporting their trans kids. And at this one, we saw a neo-Nazi group called the Aryan Freedom Network, and also Proud Boys were present, and some protesters carried swastika flags along with anti-Semitic and homophobic signs. So just in a couple of weeks from Walsh starting his campaign, we see numerous threats and calls for violence that have been directed at hospitals across the country. And that children's hospital he targeted announced it was going to stop providing gender-affirming surgeries to those under 18. And he wasn't done. He capped this off with a sort of a victory lap. He held a rally to end child mutilation in Nashville a week or so ago, along with Blackburn, also Tulsi Gabbard, and Proud Boys, who showed up once the rally was already underway, and what people there said kind of looked like this like planned militaristic entrance, like a show of force, with the state troopers, just kind of standing between them and all the people.
Hang on. Pop quiz for the chat. Why do socialists associate drag shows with, I'm going to modify this, the queer community? It's not necessarily the trans community. Why do socialists associate drag shows and drag queens with the queer community? Catherine, we don't debunk. I'm sorry. You got to listen. If you cannot explain back to me what she believes and why she believes it, then you need to do more listening than debunking. Why do socialists compare drag shows and drag queens to queer? Because the purpose of drag queens and drag queen story hour and drag shows for kids is that drag teaches that gender is a performance, because gender is a performance. Gender is a performance. Why do socialists want to teach people that gender is a performance, because queer is about abolishing the gender binary, because they believe that capitalism created the gender binary. The gender binary is men and women. Another word for the gender binary is the patriarchy. It put men in the workplace where they got all the power and all the money. It put women in the home doing the unpaid labor of raising the next generation of proletarian workers in the nuclear family. And they believe if they abolish the gender binary by teaching kids that teaching kids that gender is performative, gender is something you can change, gender is fluid, changing your gender is the same thing as changing an outfit. If they can abolish the gender binary by destabilizing those norms, then they believe that is an attack on capitalism that will also help them to abolish the nuclear family, which is another attack on capitalism. So that's why drag shows and drag performance teaches that gender is a performance. It's fluid. Drag queens are to show gender is a performance as an attack on the gender binary. If they get to abolish the gender binary, which means getting rid of men and women, non-binary literally means no binary. Anytime you hear someone with they, them pronouns, or they, she pronouns, or he, they pronouns, anything with they or anything that is not he or she, that means they are non-binary, no binary. Let's see. Lots of other correct answers in the chat. Yep, this is an attack on normativity. Normativity is another word for capitalism. Exactly. Great work, guys. Lots of correct answers. If you got a correct answer, I'm apologizing. I'm not showing all of them because there were a lot of correct answers. But please give yourself a pat on the back. You know who you are.
Who showed up to support trans kids and mostly drowned out the speakers. But then it got kind of pitched as like two sides in a fight when, what was going on was an attempt to sort of defend the community from all of these people. And of course, after the rally, none of the elected officials there present said anything to condemn the Proud Boys' presence. So that's just a kind of a snapshot of what this cycle is, of how things are moving from these confrontations in particular places, documented. They get onto Fox News, that generates more social media content, which generates more protests. And it's just been spinning like this for months. And of course, it goes back further, but I will wait until we get into that later.
Frame of what is new in this conjuncture, right? So attacks on queer and trans people have been happening for a long time. There have been fascists in America a long time. Is there something about this moment that you feel like has some novelty or some change?
I'll pop in there.
Yeah, please, Max.
I was actually jotting down some notes on like what's new in this moment, and that's everything from like the technology that we use to share the information and the ways in which they create silos for themselves. Like that's what the right and folks have been getting good at for the last several decades, is how to create these silos of information where they can all gather and brainwash each other and not allow in any qualitative new information.
The ironclad
to
law of
allow for their
socialist.
growth and
Oh,
learning.
socialist tattoos.
But what I really think,
socialist tattoos. You guys see that? The black line tattoos on they them's arm. Hang on.
They can all gather and brainwash each other and not allow in any qualitative new information.
Bing. I call these socialist tattoos. When I say socialist tattoos, what I mean is bad black tattoos. They're almost always just like very simple black line tattoos. These are particularly bad. They're not always quite this bad, but there's a thing in, so I bet you this is like an anarchist, like an anarcho communist subculture thing. There is a weird thing that I've just noticed this pattern over and over and over again, that socialists on their arms will have a lot of really bad black tattoos of like random shit. Like you can see here, there's a sun with sunglasses. There's something there on her arm. I can't make out what it is. I think she's got something on her hand up here. She's got like the Lion King thing. She probably, I saw she had tattoos on her other arm as well. It's like, yeah, exactly, Joseph. They look like prison tattoos, but they're not prison tattoos. Like they're purposefully like just bad tattoos. And I call them socialist tattoos, not because the only people in the world who have bad black tattoos on their arm are socialist, but because if you're in like a socialist type situation, you're going to see a lot of people with bad black tattoos on their arm. Very rarely do I see socialists with color tattoos. Like you'll see like all my tattoos, with the exception of like this lettering that I have on my wrist, all of my tattoos have color. It is like, and I understand it's like an aesthetic. Some people just prefer black and white tattoos, and that's fine. But like, it is extremely rare for me to see socialists with like a lot of colorful tattoos. It almost always looks like that.
To allow for their growth and learning. But what I really think is actually the most profound part about what's happening in our current political climate is the
okay, as I just explained, though, I just said that not everyone who has bad black tattoos of a lot. And by the way, you're not even really listening to what I'm saying. It's not just black tattoos. It's black tattoos of a lot of random shit that doesn't go together. We're not talking about like a well-constructed sleeve. We're talking about a lot of, it's on their arms specifically. They do this, and they have a lot of random shit that doesn't go together. So, as I specifically said, because people like this always like to come in and say, I'm the exception, therefore the rule doesn't apply. Not everyone who has bad black tattoos of random shit on their arms is a socialist, but a lot of socialists have bad black tattoos on their arms. And so it's something that you can use to inform yourself of who you're talking to. Oh, now we're getting all the exceptions in the chat. Okay. All right. Does anyone else want to offer that they're an exception without does anyone else want to willfully misunderstand the point I'm making? It's like with polyamory. Not all polyamorous people are socialist, but a lot of socialist people are polyamorous. You can't tell if someone's a socialist based purely on the fact that they're polyamorous. But if you take the polyamory with a whole bunch of other stuff, it can inform you.
Inspiration of the elite. You see the devastation that we see around us is due to like capitalism ending.
Bing.
And they absolutely need a section of the working class to usher in the new but kind of old form of what we're calling like neo-feudalism as our next economic system. You know, the truth is, and we spoke on this, right? The truth is like that the rise of fascism for thousands of years has began with attacks on queer people, trans people, women, POC, and it, you know, it's what Hitler did and the Nazis did in Berlin. It's what the Industrial South did before that, and so on. And where we're starting to see these big changes is in the fact that like there is so much devastation happening around us, and all of us.
Jacob is asking a question. Welcome, Jacob. The tattoo thing, do you think it has to do with socialist types being more open to new experiences? I would actually flip that around, Jacob. What I would say is that the difference between a lot of people who are traditionally on the conservative right and a lot of people who are more on the left is that the conservative right is not creative at all. I'm not saying there aren't exceptions to this. There are some conservatives who are creative, but I do think there's something about the brain of someone that is drawn towards more of a conservative ideology, that they are not flexible in their thinking. They can't think outside the box. Everything has to be very black and white. They can't look at things from multiple angles. They don't make music. They don't make art. They don't write. This is why conservatives do not create culture, because the only thing that they know how to do is like react to other people. And every once in a while they might come out with something good, and then quickly they go back to just doing really shitty art and stuff like that. And so I think it has more to do with like conservatives don't have a goddamn creative bone in their body. Now they could learn if they wanted to, but I think it's more to do with their brain. And I think that a lot of like, I mean, I've always had art and culture in my life, and so I don't really understand that mindset, but I think that that's part of it.
Are trying to make sense of that devastation, whether no matter what side of this thing we're on, and that right there is like what's causing us to now be willing to no longer engage in discourse.
All right, people are asking a lot of questions tonight, but I think they're good questions, so I'm continuing to pause them and answer them. So I apologize for people who might be annoyed by this, but this is part of the purpose of this. It's to teach. Question, back to queer. Are there minor attracted persons and activist factions hiding within the queer faction? How does that fit in? Not as many as you would think. Not really. Now, what will get socialists in trouble is that socialists, much like libertarians, do not believe in age of consent laws. However, that's not to say that the people who don't believe in the age of consent laws are in favor of sexualizing children, because I've actually heard some of them speak out very strongly against it. I've actually heard Sophie Lewis. Sophie Lewis is one of our favorite Abolish the Family socialists, speak very strongly against sexualizing children, like very, very strongly. So she'll say, children have the ability to make their own decisions. They're autonomous human beings. Like, she doesn't believe necessarily like age of consent laws that are enforced by the government, but she does not believe that children should be sexualized, and she believes that that the community has an obligation to care for them and protect them from being sexualized. So this is a lie that's been started by the conservative right. I'm sorry. It's just like not true. That's not to say that those people don't exist. Obviously they exist, but I've been watching this stuff really heavily for years now. I don't see it. I've been to their in-person events. I don't see it there. So I'm not saying that there aren't people that could easily be painted with that, but it's not something that's a big thing in queer Marxism. So this is more about the reason you guys hear so much about minor attracted persons and all that stuff is not because it's a big thing on the left at all. It's just not. You hear about it because your influencers want to rile you up for money, because nothing pisses conservatives off more than the pedo stuff. And I'm not saying there's not a reason to be pissed off about it. What I am saying is that they're trying to rile you up to make money. It's not like, if I could find presentations where they're like overtly doing this stuff, I would show them to you. No problem. But they aren't there. They don't exist. So let me see. I got a couple super chats come in. Chris says they let their this actually could be Chris. They let their tattoo artist friends practice on them. Interesting. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Not among the radical revolutionary socialist left. I don't see it. If you guys have evidence of it, then show it, but I have never seen it among the groups I track. And I've been looking for it. It's not as though I never looked. It's like, it just doesn't exist.
In the streets, about it, that like this is a moment of survival for many people, and it is giving, and they're using this disaster as a way to like mobilize their base, this fascist base, for their fascist thinking, to be able to, like I said, usher in this new economic system.
Sheila T, is there anything you'd like to add before you ask LV a question?
Not super specifically. I was also going to point out maybe the like technological.
Sorry, Akshay is asking a good question. When people change their belief from left-leaning to conservative, does their creativity and ability to create also change and diminish? No. If you have a flexible creative mindset, then you have a flexible creative mindset, and that's never going to change. What I will tell you is it is goddamn near impossible to create art within the conservative context. It's not possible. Like, I tried. They don't understand it. Like, conservatives don't understand art and music. A lot of them don't understand satire. A lot of them, they don't read as much as they pretend that they kind of do. And so it's like, if you are trying to operate in the space of the conservative right and you're trying to like create culture like art and music and things like that, the only stuff that's going to be successful on the conservative right is like the really cheesy kind of like, what's his name? What is his name? The black rapper with the big MAGA hat. Bryson. Like Bryson Gray wearing a red MAGA hat and rapping about MAGA and how great Trump is. That's going to be very successful on the conservative right because it's shit music. It's awful. It's not good. It's not creative. It's not well produced. It's not entertaining, but it's just like, it's very kind of like easy content that is like but that's what they like. They like simple things that are direct into Hallmark. Yes, exactly. The Hallmark Channel. This is the creativity that conservatives respond to. Hallmark Channel, Lifetime movies, Kid Rock, that sort of stuff. I mean, tattoos don't really piss people off anymore, I don't think. Like, does anyone really still get pissed off by tattoos? Anyway.
Changes and how those have kind of just like facilitated and helped like further decentralize and like aid a lot of people to kind of like mutually brainwash each other and feel empowered to kind of like act across like much bigger geographical areas, but I feel like most of that was touched on.
Mm-hmm. LV, you're welcome to add to this, but I wanted to ask the next question, sort of going back in history a little bit, sort of thinking about immediate antecedents or preceding events to the current conjuncture. Could you share about the history of Bashback? And for audience members who might know nothing about the organization, the network, and its history.
Sure. Yeah, Bashback was kind of made a big splash, but was very short-lived from like 2008 to 2011. It got its start in, conflict or street clashes with Nazis, in particular in Milwaukee and in other cities in the Midwest. And it's sort of, I think one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot in the last year in particular is, what made Bashback kind of happen in that moment and not in this moment. The network of Bashback, because it was sort of like, felt like there was thousands of, militant queers that were supporting each other.
Listen, guys, if you like Hallmark movies, no one has to apologize for liking them. You like what you like. I like Lifetime movies. I fucking love Lifetime movies. But I also acknowledge that when I'm watching a Lifetime movie, especially like the Flowers in the Attics type, like the V.C. Andrews, like bad, I love that. I love it. I love it more than I can tell you. I will also acknowledge, though, that I'm watching really horrible movies. They're not good. Okay? I know it's like watching soap operas. You know they're not good, but they're a guilty pleasure. You don't have to think when you're watching them. They appeal to the dumbest possible parts of your brain. So it's okay to like that stuff. I'm not commenting on people who do. I'm just saying that it's not high art. All right? Amelia says, if conservatives were exposed to Sigur Rós, I believe their heads would explode. It's too fluid, asymmetrical. Oh, yeah. If you are thinking kind of like in a weird kind of way and you're producing art or music in a weird way, conservatives are not going to understand it at all.
And publicizing their actions and doing, kind of like hyping each other up to fight back against, homophobia, transphobia, racism, like a number, sexual violence, like a number of different things. And I think, yeah, I just feel like one of the aspects that made Bashback somewhat, just made it different was just the coming together of people. I think that in 2008, when the broadcasting and the kind of like social dimension of these actions made this sort of like the experience around queer self-defense and queer violence like more powerful, I would say. And so like in 2008, when there was this clash in Milwaukee, it was sort of like they circulated a picture of themselves like wearing these pink masks and holding bats, and wrote like a little communique and posted it on anarchistnews.org, which just seemed to be like a big deal at that time. I felt like in the late 2000s, it felt very much like the revolutionary left was kind of dominated by like anarchist discourse. And so,
Human Centipede, did you hear that? In the late 2000s, which is the time period that we've been looking at those zines for, the revolutionary left was kind of dominated by anarchist discourse. What did we say earlier? That the reason that James Lindsay and his band of merry followers cannot predict what the left is doing is because they're focusing entirely on academic research, mostly concentrating around like Marx and Hegel and all that stuff. Academic research is fine, but what is going on the left right now is not just inspired by Marx. It's not just inspired by Hegel. It's not just inspired by Foucault or Butler or any of the other academics. It's not just inspired by Mao or Lenin or any of the revolutionaries from days of yore. It's not just inspired by that. What it is, and I made this argument the other day on a stream, but I'm going to make it again, because I just want, there are different people here. So think of the movie Contagion. Contagion is a movie about a worldwide plague, kind of like COVID, but we're talking about a movie, so it's a little bit less severe, I guess, in which the plague was started because a pig had a certain like disease or like there was a pig in a farm. It was just hanging out. The pig was there. The bat flew in and shit on the pig and contaminated the pig with whatever was in the bat shit. The pig then got slaughtered and served up to customers in a high-end restaurant, and that was patient 0 in Contagion, okay? The idea behind Marxism gain of function is that it's not as though like Marx and Mao and all of the academic research isn't important. It is. That's the pig. Marx, Mao, like all the rest of the stuff that James Lindsay and his band of Gnostic sex cultists, like obsessed lunatics, that's the pig, okay? The bat is the queer anarchist literature, the queer anarchist zines, the queer anarchist subculture. The bat came in, shit on the pig, and mutated a new strain of Marxism. That's gain of function Marxism. What we're dealing with the actual activists in the real world are not people that are just purely enacting the academic literature. The bat has come in, shit on the academic literature, and mutated into a new strain of Marxism so that it's influenced by both. Does that make sense to people? The problem is that I don't know of anyone that's looked into the queer anarchist subculture. That's what we're going to be spending some time doing, because the more that we spend time doing that, like every single time we're looking at queer anarchist subculture, and Human Centipede's been doing a great job of like going through some of this stuff. He's been DMing me a lot of stuff. It is a direct translation to what we're seeing in the real world. So that's why James Lindsay cannot predict what the socialists are going to do at this point. Like, he just gets things wrong over and over and over again, because the socialists aren't following the pure literature. The socialists are in some sort of weird mutated strain of Marxism that is heavily influenced, like she just said, by anarchist discourse. Let's listen to that again. I felt in the late 2000s. The zines we've been looking at are from like 2009. So it's exactly the same time that we're talking about.
In the late 2000s, it felt very much like the revolutionary left was kind of dominated by like anarchist discourse.
Bing.
And so, you know, that kind of like created a container for that discussion, and people were able to kind of discuss in these comments.
The revolutionary left is dominated by anarchist discourse. That is what has inspired the current Marxist activists in the world.
Forums, I guess sort of like, you know, in a Reddit, like vibe, all of these different kind of actions and sort of like organize themselves to form chapters in other cities and in different capacities. And so from that kind of like experience, people called for a convergence in Minneapolis. And then there was another convergence, which was very large in Chicago. And then the final one was it was in Denver. And I think that the convergence model is another aspect of Bashback that I kind of feel like I have mixed feelings about it. I feel like on the one hand, it enabled the conditions to bring people together in this kind of like, you know, very visible way. And on the other hand, it was, I think like most people probably in this panel and maybe like the listeners will probably agree that it's sort of like when you bring together a lot of like radicals or just anybody, you know, conflict is going to arise. And it's sort of like Bashback is ironically like formed around conflict, around like facing conflict head on, but it's sort of like the interpersonal conflict is what seems to tank these projects like consistently. And I feel like that was the case with Bashback. It's sort of like in Denver, we had, you know, we made a lot of like efforts to do conflict mediation within the different people that were coming to the convergence. However, it's sort of like some of these like splits just became unmanageable. And I think there was also kind of like an ideological split there too, where it was sort of like, there's kind of like a community building aspect of like self-defense and saying like, okay, we're going to mostly focus on like legible targets and, you know, neo-Nazis and different kind of like very like visible moments. And then there's sort of more like what I would consider like kind of an anarcho-insurrectionist approach, which is more like we're going to attack
approach
in the multiplicity.
Anarcho means anarcho-communist, not to be confused with an anarcho-capitalist. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I don't believe the government should exist, but I think private property should exist. When they're saying anarcho, they mean anarcho-communist, which is they don't believe the government should exist. They also don't believe private property should exist.
Of ways that this violence this oppression is enacting on us. So it's more kind of like how do we confront bigots on the street? And it's very difficult to like organize a group of people around that. Whereas like kind of anarcho-insurrectionist response is more like, okay, well, we're fighting all the time and this fight never ends. And it's sort of like we're kind of like embracing this like pure negation. And so Bashback kind of was the synthesis of these two different like approaches. And I think that for like a brief moment, it was like a really beautiful synthesis and could have been a very powerful one. But I think ultimately like they're somewhat incompatible, but like, I don't think that we were able to kind of hold those two together and move forward with them, which is probably what it would have taken for that to last. So I guess I feel like, you know, I feel like I absolutely feel like there needs to be something like Bashback right now. I think like, especially for supporting youth that are engaging in defense right now, like in Los Angeles a couple of years ago, we had, you know, a number of street clashes with Nazis around the Wiesbaden stuff. And
How would they enforce the abolition of private property if they don't have a government? They would form their own militia, their own Stasi, their own they're going to call it like a community council or a community board, and they're going to have like unofficial, like their big thing is they believe that the government reinforces capitalism. That's why they want to get rid of that. They also believe that the police, as organized today, also are the enforcers of capitalism. And so what they're going to do is it's going to look like police, but it's going to be operated a little bit differently. I mean, that's like what the Stasi is, essentially. But they're going to have their own enforcement mechanisms. You can't do what they want to do without it.
And so people are doing this self-defense action, but it's the more social aspect of it that seems to be like,
I mean, the community would also enforce it. Have you guys been seeing on the college campuses? I just saw a video earlier today of like kind of a counter protester who was going on. I don't know what campus it was on. Like maybe it was like it might have been Northeastern. I don't know. It was one of them. I tweeted it. It's on my timeline somewhere. But like this activist was going on to the encampment to try to film them. What happened was a bunch of protesters just surrounded him and wouldn't really let him move. So he would try to go over here. They would follow him and block him. He would try to go over here. They'd follow him and block him. And so it's kind of like the community is also going to try to enforce the norms on a lot of these college campuses. We've seen they've actually set up their own police force. They don't call it a police force. They call it security. But Columbia set up their own student security arm like very early on in their encampment. And actually, in order to even get on the encampment, you have to go through the student security.
Missing from that component, sort of like the isolated actions are happening, but like the communication and the almost like celebration and the hyping up of each other around those actions is not really like, I think we need to strategize to how to create that a new container that makes sense for this moment.
Oh, is he? What do you mean by that?
One aspect that you spoke about, but I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit more, is the way Bashback networked people across the country and also had some international connections, and the sort of a little bit about the scope and the kind of networked quality of it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of that was the fact that, Aragorn had created this platform with anarchistnews.org and kind of like just contain that dialogue. And so it's essentially like somebody that was sympathetic to the Bashback cause was like creating a space for this conversation to happen. Whereas like, the dialogues that are happening around self-defense right now, whether it's on Twitter or whether it's on like TikTok or a number of different platforms, are just these kind of like sites of corporate alienation that like no actual like in-person organizing can come out of those kind of experiences. So, I personally think that the social, like being in proximity to each other, is really important. So these convergences were important. And I think it was like at that point in like the late 2000s, it was like the DNC and the RNC convergences were like these mass mobilizations that brought together a lot of like the revolutionary left to be together and kind of like learn the skills of bringing that number of people together. And
so again, the late 2000s, I bet this happened after Obama was elected. And I'm not saying Obama caused this. Don't get it twisted. Because conservatives like to say that Obama caused all socialism, and that's just not true. That's really not true. What she's kind of saying is, again, it's in the late 2000s, which we had already identified as kind of like a key date around the radical revolutionary left. And she's saying that whatever was going on with the DNC and the RNC back then brought the revolutionary left together and solidified them in a new way. So that's like maybe we should try to I can try to find like videos and stuff from back around then. I know that some of them exist, but that's actually really interesting that they keep bringing up that time frame specifically, because that was when Occupy Wall Street happened. That was when mentions of racism started skyrocketing in all the major newspapers. That is when equity departments got deployed in almost every school district nationally. It's that specific time period, and it has nothing to do with Obama.
So like Bashback kind of like was a part of that context. And I think that we've lost some of those skills over the years, like the skills of just being able to like handle a group of like, 500,000 people that are like coming into a city, like housing, food, like, but the conflict management and like all those different things are aspects of it.
Thank you so much. It's just really fascinating history.
Yeah, but two ladies, we're always going to stay up to date with what they're doing now. But if we can pinpoint what influenced the current movement, it can help us predict what they're going to do next.
So next, I wanted to ask first Sheila T. and then Max, if you could share a little bit about some tactics and strategies around mutual aid,
that's probably
care,
a good idea.
self-defense that you're seeing on the ground, that you've encountered or been a part of or seen, and what you think works, what you think is helpful to people. So Sheila T.
Yeah, I feel like what I've been seeing for the last, 5 to 7-ish years in Philly has been, in terms of mutual aid, a lot of information sharing and like distribution of like pepper spray and stuff like that in terms of like queers who are tied up in sex work stuff, or just like bad date lists, and yeah, just like information about which like how to get work done in ways that are like safer. And on the other hand, I feel like, yeah, people just kind of more informally networking with each other to kind of like have protection for work or not for work, just in life, and like having like people that they can call, and kind of like developing both that as like as a social network or like set of social networks, and also as like a set of skills to like de-escalate or escalate. And I think a lot of that is not completely separate from, I guess I would say maybe like two things. And this is like partially tying back to some of the Bashback stuff. I feel like one is that, at least here, it's like after a certain point, it just felt like the like anti-fascist organizing was just like queers were overly represented in that world. And so it, even though maybe from the outside or from like reading what people wrote, it wasn't always like super clear that it was like queer and trans people involved in like organizing against fascists and far right people. But I feel like that was a thing, and I feel like that also brought certain.
Hang on, Matthew's asking a question. Is democratic socialism like no. Matthew, you must have joined a little bit later. I actually talked a little bit about this earlier, but welcome. We're glad you're here. Guys, democratic socialists and the radical revolutionary left are not remotely the same thing. They don't even get along. The radical revolutionary leftist groups will not allow their members to join the Democratic Socialists of America. They believe the Democratic Socialists of America capitulated to capitalism. They believe they are traitors to their cause. They believe they're basically no different than the Democratic Party. They're also like revolutionary socialists, again, who are the ones that you're seeing causing all the problems in the world. They don't like the Democrats, they don't like the progressives, and they certainly don't like the Democratic Socialists of America. They do not like AOC, they do not like Bernie Sanders. They believe all of them are treacherous. So no, democratic socialism is not the pop culture version to get them here, because they would be perfectly happy if the Democratic Socialists just went away. But thanks for asking the question. I do appreciate it. Guys, please make sure you mount the like button if you have not already. Mounting the like button will let YouTube know to recommend my content to more people. I really do appreciate you being here, especially all of the new people who are joining us, maybe for the first time. Please feel free to chat in questions, and I will take them as they come up.
Like skills and like ways of thinking to those networks that spill beyond people who are just organizing against fascist stuff. Like one example I can think of from before COVID that like has kept going is that a lot of anti-fascists started practicing like different like boxing and like combat sports And then that kind of like spilled out and became like just like a larger than anti-fascist like anarchist thing, and then that spilled out larger and like was like open to like queers and anarchists and anti-fascists and kind of like their friends and networks as well. And then on the other side, like kind of like less tied up with strictly anti-fascism and more tying up this kind of idea of like
actually it's funny you bring this up, Space Jack, because Haymarket Books, who we're watching right now, is literally doing a live stream about the Communist Manifesto. They're re-releasing a new version of the Communist Manifesto on Tuesday. And so we're going to be watching that live at 5 p.m. If you want to hear what today's socialists are saying about the Communist Manifesto, Tuesday, 5 p.m., we will learn directly from them.
Insurrectionary anarchy as it like was playing out with the bashback stuff, I feel like there were a good amount of like, yeah, just like different attacks.
Hang on. No, they're not. No. Listen, conservatives, I'm going to speak very sternly to you right now. None of you have a clue about how this stuff is being funded. No, you don't. I know that the New York Post and Alex Jones and all of your influencers are reading about George Soros right now. No. It's wrong. They are feeding you wrong conspiracy theory driven information that isn't even directly hinged in to what is going on the ground. The Democratic Socialists do not fund the radical revolutionary socialist groups. Let me explain to you how the radical revolutionary socialists are funded. Almost like pretty much every single, well, actually, I won't even say pretty much. Every single radical revolutionary group that I personally have looked into is self-funded. They don't have these big political donors. They are not getting money from George Soros. That is all conservative lunacy. They actually purposefully will not take money like that because they believe that money like that corrupts their cause. These are radicals, guys. These are people who, being a radical revolutionary socialist is part of their identity. They believe in their values so much more strongly than the conservative right believes in anything. They're not going to take money that they believe corrupts their cause. These people don't believe in running for political office, so they don't do it. I mean, maybe onesie or twosies here and there, but in the founding documents for a lot of their organizations, they flat out say, we're not going to achieve our goals through politics, and we're not going to take outside money because it corrupts our cause. How they are and exactly, Beth, these groups do not associate with the WEF. These groups hate the WEF. They're two different groups. I'm not saying the WEF isn't a problem. They are an entirely different problem. How the radical revolutionary socialist groups are funded is usually through four ways, a combination of these things. They're funded by dues that they charge their members. We know that the Revolutionary Communists of America charges 1 day's wages per month as part of your membership dues. There are other dues models as well, but that's one of the ways that they're funded, so people actually paying into them. They are funded through donations. They are always constantly soliciting just like donations and things to their cause. They are funded by selling event tickets. If they're holding events or workshops or trainings or stuff like that, you can buy a ticket. A lot of the times their training is actually free and they ask for a donation for the training. Or, and this is the big one, a lot of these groups are funded by publishing books, publishing periodicals, publishing pamphlets, publishing written things or digital content, but they do a lot of like written stuff. Even if you want to get a brochure from some of these people, you have to pay them money for it. So that's how they're funding it. It's through dues, through donations, through events, and through publishing. So George Soros has nothing to do with it. The Democratic Socialists of America have nothing to do with it. People have got to get that out of their heads. And by the way, conservatives, you can keep asking me questions because I'm already seeing this come up in the chat where now what conservatives are going to do is they're going to try to ask me questions, basically the same question to try to get me to give a different answer. My answer is going to be the same. They are entirely self-funded. Yeah, Micah, it does sound like capitalism because they're allowed to participate in capitalism as long as they are using it to try to overthrow capitalism. We've covered this several times before, bro. This is not the own you think it is. They participate in capitalism to take down the system. Recently started following me on X. Marxism and Marxist indoctrination is the primary issue in the world today. Delighted to see you're highlighting this. You're dealing with it in Ireland too. Oh yeah, the United Kingdom is way more socialist than America, bro. I wish you the very best of luck. And these people are also over there, so it's the same people. I would definitely look into them. Thank you for following along. Appreciate it.
And sabotages that took place, almost all of them were anonymous, but some of them that had like responsibility claims or like any sort of like written communication were like written either like clearly influenced by queer theory and like queer ideas, or like claimed by people who, while like maintaining anonymity, like they were like gay or trans or queer or dykes or whatever. And I feel like that, I imagine like network of people or groups of people like had to figure out the ways to like seek out and develop the like
Mary Nardini game was Bashback. Bashback is what they were talking about earlier. Yeah, they've been talking about the same stuff. So I think we're on to something. If you want to not be politically effective at all and you want to waste a lot of time and money, I would say go ahead and run for school board. Unless you live in Vermont and Connecticut, the school board has no authority over the curriculum. So what you're going to do is you're going to get onto the school board. You're going to spend a lot of time in meetings. You aren't actually going to be able to accomplish anything. You are not going to have any influence over the curriculum. You are not going to be able to stop any of this stuff in schools. You can try. I mean, I'm not saying you should give up the school boards entirely, but I don't think that that's the best way to fight these people.
To like do violence in the same way that the anti-fascists had to, and I think that also that brought a lot of like
Hang on, Catherine, this is not true. You've got to stop listening to whatever conservative influencers are lying to you. It is not Democrats bringing revolutionary socialism into schools. It is socialists bringing revolutionary socialism into schools. The administrators of your schools are likely socialist. Most of the teachers in your schools are likely socialist. The people in the school districts are likely socialist. Everyone in the teachers' unions are socialist. They are not Democrats. It doesn't matter what they're registered as. These are socialists.
And individual empowerments, like those people in the networks that were around them as well.
Thank you. And Max.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And similar, right? Whereas like engaging in like mutual learning and information sharing. We're seeing working is like engaging in public facing events, you know. This like allows for folks to find ways to plug in and new folks to support their affinity / community building with. Oftentimes, you know, these folks are coming, their families are, you know, not as deep in the weeds, and their friends, you know,
Thanks, Micah.
I oftentimes speak with youth who are like, everybody around me isn't talking about this stuff. And so we have to create spaces for them to come and meet other youth or other people who are talking about this stuff. And for us, 2020 really opened up the door to for the anti-fascism, but also anti-fascist self-defense tactics. You know, Antifa got airwaves like never before. And you know, what is Antifa? Trended on Google searches for days, during those times. So creating things like anarchist book fairs in the areas that don't, normally have them. Sacramento, we compete with the Bay all the time, but here we have everything from like queer self-defense groups that are community forward facing, that allow for community members to hit us up and be like, where are y'all training this weekend so I can join you? They train every Sunday. We have a forward-facing queer defense formation that walks our queer district in Sacramento. We have events where queers can come and paint bricks. In Sac, we have Pride Was a Riot, who's dope, and is pink in a pink bandana, masked up and tabling at the farmers market on Saturdays. Even further, they did a campaign to get every vendor at that market to have signs that say, we support trans kids. It's those forward public facing efforts that are normalizing not just like anti-fascism, but different tactics of self-defense. And all of
Antifa trains in self-defense tactics. Antifa trains in hand-to-hand combat. Like, at least two of these people in this presentation are legitimate Antifa. LV's Antifa, Max's Antifa. I think Sheila, I'm pretty sure Sheila's an anarchist, but like Sheila's also on drugs like every single time we see her, so I'm not that worried about Sheila, if I'm honest.
Of its tactics, whether that's physically self-defending and using things like pepper spray or physical self-defense tactics, or creating a culture in a community that provides that safety just by people walking in knowing that they're welcome. Things like that have proved the most helpful, and have proved to support folks in their entering or in their introduction to anti-fascism and the anti-fascist orgs in town. And it's allowed for us to meet folks where they're at with it too, and we always talk about the different things that go into supporting this work. We all see those flyers where there's like 10 support roles to a protest and things like that, whether that's you're safely doing it from your home for all different kinds of able body types, right? We're being very inclusive in our ability in our ability to get involved, but in how we're meeting our community where they're at. And then during 2020, we held events.
Oh, good question, Jacob. I saw a short of you the other day talking about homonormativity. Does this connect to that? Yes. It connects directly to this, actually, because these are all queer Marxists. So pop quiz for the chat. What is homonormativity and how does it connect to the people that we're watching right now who are all queer Marxists? Let's see who's paying attention. What is homonormativity and how does it connect to the people we're watching right now, the queer Marxists? We've been talking about homonormativity a lot lately. Homonormativity keeps coming up. All right, I'm seeing answers start to come in. Homonormativity upholds the nuclear family and capitalism, so they don't like it. Yup, give me a little bit more. Okay, I need everyone to answer the first question. What is homonormativity? You guys aren't answering that. Jane has it. Homonormativity are gay couples who participate in capitalism. Participating in capitalism in this case is going to be assimilating to normativity, which means gay people who just want to get married and buy a home and have kids and live a life and don't want to be political activists. That's considered to be homonormativity. Homonormativity is a gay person that upholds the norm, which is capitalism and the nuclear family. So oftentimes you'll hear queer Marxists use the term heteronormativity, or they sometimes use cis heteronormativity. And actually the Mary Nardini gang was like all about like heteronormativity because gay marriage hadn't been legalized yet when the Mary Nardini gang wrote their propaganda. But homonormativity is actually considered to be a slur because queer Marxists, queer activists don't like it when gay people assimilate to normative culture. Basically, what they're saying is gay people are assimilating to acting straight. That means they're no longer queer. And that's a problem. Yeah, homonormativity is like Dave Rubin. Yup, exactly. Homonormative is like heteronormative. It upholds capitalism in a binary way, except it's gay couples. Gay couples still represent the nuclear family and built on capitalism, which they oppose. Queer Marxists want to abolish the nuclear family. Homonormative couples are gay couples who want to uphold the nuclear family. Queer Marxists want to abolish the gender binary. Homonormative couples uphold the gender binary. Now, that might seem weird because they're gay, but like they believe that there are men and they believe that there are women. It's the difference between gay and trans guys. Trans people are transitioning from being a man to a woman or a woman to a man. They still uphold the gender binary. They're saying you can switch between the two, which not everyone agrees with, and that's fine. But the reality is that most trans people believe there are men and there are women, and they just want to be the opposite gender than which they were born. That upholds the gender binary. Queer people, non-binary people, want to abolish the gender binary. They want to get rid of all gender. That's the difference. Homonormativity is gays upholding the traditional family structure, which upholds capitalism, and these people hate that. Gay and lesbian people who don't go against the gender binary. Values gay take on uphold the nuclear family and capitalism, marriage, 2 kids, raising kids, monogamy. Yes. One of the ways in which they're going to try to queer the nuclear family or queer marriage is polyamory. So non-monogamy. They call it ethical non-monogamy. Or they actually even sometimes call it relationship anarchy. Anyway, lots of good answers to that, guys. So hypothetically, there could be polynormativity. I don't think so, because at least not right now. Maybe there could be at some point, but right now, the system is kind of designed against polyamorous people. And so if we got to, okay, so homonormativity became a thing after gay marriage was nationalized. If, excuse me, if there was like a national law to legalize polyamorous couples and offer benefits and perks to like polyamorous couples, like insurance and hospital visitation and stuff like that. So basically like gay marriage, but with polyamory. If that became a national thing, then I do believe that polynormativity would become a thing. But because right now there are very few locations that offer like legal protections and benefits to polyamorous couples, I don't think we can say yet that polynormativity would become a thing right now, because polyamory is one of the primary ways that they're trying to queer the nuclear family. But it could in the future if it became more, if polyamory became more normative, then polynormativity would become a thing. I hope that makes sense. All right, there's been lots of good conversation in the chat. I can't possibly go back and follow all of it. So we'll get right back into it.
That did everything that we called them "We Keep Us Safe" events, and they talked about everything from tear gas and tourniquets to abolition through an indigenous framework and gender 101 that went on like once a week throughout that time. And so this ability to create, again, public facing. And we can't be afraid to be like, we're anti-fascists, you know, like they got the wit out on their table every Saturday at the farmer's market. You know, they got it. They got those big circles and those big A's everywhere. Oh, you know, it's normalizing it, but by creating the ways for us to get publicly involved and to be meeting our community where they're at. Not only are we like normalizing these things, but we're also letting them recognize that we're their community. We are the community that they want to be a part of when they say they want housing as a human right, when they say they want healthcare for all, when they say they want food access for everybody, that like this is actually an anarcho-communist thought and theory.
When you're talking about housing as a human right, that means no one owns private houses. When you're talking about universal health care, that means no one has private doctors. When you're talking about food access for everyone, that means the government is in control of the food supply. And Max, they, them, is saying this is all part of like a queer anarchist belief system. So again, like people, the idea of universal healthcare can be really enticing, right? Like you mean we get to have like you don't have to deal with insurance, you get access to everything you need. I understand I understand why people are drawn to that, but we have to think to the logical end conclusion of this. Everything that Max just said, again, housing is a human right. Okay, that sounds like a great idea. How do you actually implement housing as a human right? The government owns all the houses and the people don't own houses. That's the only way to make that work. There is no private home ownership. That is how you make housing a human right. How do you make universal health care work? You have to get rid of all private doctors, all private insurance companies, and the government controls all healthcare and all doctors and who gets access to what. How do you make food access a human right? It sounds like a great idea. We want to create this world in which everyone has enough to eat. Yeah, I think all of us can get behind that idea. How do you make access to food a human right? The government controls the food supply. These people literally talk about having no private kitchens in homes because everyone goes to the communal area to get their food rations and eat their food. Let's go back and just listen to them say that again. We're their community. We're their community. That means the collective.
We're their community. We are the community that they want to be a part of when they say they want housing as a human right, when they say they want healthcare for all, when they say they want food access for everybody, that like this is actually an anarcho-communist thought and theory, and they don't even recognize that they are objectively this way. We need them to recognize it in their subjective lives as well. So yeah, that's about it for us, is like that forward facing, being willing to engage in dialogue, discussion, information sharing, and mutual learning.
Oh, that's beautiful. So we're going to open it up between each other. I have a question for everybody, but it's also an opportunity to respond to each other and to begin to sort of draw out themes or things that are evocative for you. And then at some point, I'll start throwing in some questions from the audience on YouTube. So the question for everybody to open our discussion is, what do you see as the value of self-defense in the current moment? And Max spoke to that in quite a number of ways just now.
I guess I would say that self-defense is as important as ever, and maybe like something to like pay particular attention to.
No, bro, I need you to unlearn this. These are radical revolutionary socialists. They hate the Democrats. They are actively planning right now massive protests in Chicago at the DNC. These people are not on the side of the Democrats at all in any way. They would wipe them all off the planet if they could. They call them neoliberals. They do not align with them. They are not comrades. They are not in solidarity. They hate the Democrats more than they hate the conservatives.
Because of the like ways that queer and trans people have been like more pointedly targeted, but I don't know, like in the sense that like self-defense is just literally essential for surviving. That for me, it feels like, yeah, it could never not be an important thing. And I feel like specifically like as queer and trans people, we're like often like alienated and disempowered from like access to like violence and defense, and that like now is as good of a time as any to like develop the means and skills and networks to like be able to take care of ourselves and each other.
I think maybe I'll just add on. It's so important right now because I spoke to it earlier about the devastation that we're seeing around us, and that like on all fronts are we being attacked, and that's from everything from like state violence to far right extremist Christo fascism, that extremism, religious extremism, because that is happening globally in different forms of religion. and even ecological devastation. You know what I mean? Like, we are literally fighting for our lives and our survival. And
we are literally dying.
So defending our joy, but like organizing our rage around how to defend ourselves from the very things that are trying to convince us and gaslight us about the very real devastation that's happening in our communities, is absolutely the way forward. Because then also when because this is also like the piece in me, right? Is that if we are all actually just moving from the form of like self-defense, then inevitably what we get to is that somebody one day is not throwing the first punch, you know? And so to speak on it in such terms and such beauty, to talk about self-defense as like not a struggle for our lives, but the right for our lives, is very important right now, because like I said, our very existence is at stake.
I think, like, for me, yeah, self-defense is it's an interesting way to frame like violence, because I think that we can all agree that it's a euphemism for violence, and a lot of times when you kind of like, let's say there's a classic like instance of like a bigot that's confronting you, or whatever, like the escalation of that situation to violence is like it's a whole process, and it's a complicated process. And so it's sort of like, for me, it's kind of like, I guess, less about the act of violence and more about like, how are we like socially organizing ourselves around, supporting ourselves in a revolutionary way, and like having our kind of like eyes on the prize for the fact that like like everyone is saying our system is killing us, and especially like trans folks, like queer, trans, especially trans women of color that are sex workers, are like the front lines of this. And I don't even hear people like counting how many trans women are being murdered every year, but anymore. Like, I feel like they did that around like 2014 and the like trans tipping point, and it's not even happening, but I'm sure that it's like astronomical. And so I guess it's kind of like, for me, it's like that social aspect is really important, and that's sort of like where like militancy comes in. And not militancy, I think that like we have a tendency to kind of see militancy as like, oh, let's train ourselves in these different kind of like armed combat scenarios, and like let's get trained up for using guns, and let's get trained up in like martial arts and in a variety of different ways, which are...
What did she just say? Let's get trained up with using guns? Sith over on Rumble said a while ago, they train in weapons also. See the John Brown Gun Club as one example. When there are leftist demonstrations in Texas, socialists show up with AR-15s. The reason I bring this up is this continues to be a myth on the conservative right that leftists do not have guns and they don't know how to use guns. They do have guns. They do know how to use them. There are entire training programs around using guns, training with guns. And so if anyone thinks that the left is not armed and the right's just going to be able to take them in a civil war, which by the way, the civil war is not even going to be left versus right. The civil war is going to be radical revolutionary socialists versus the federal government. Because conservatives are way too lazy. Conservatives are never going to fight in a civil war. That is not going to happen. But these people would fight in a civil war. They're just not going to fight conservatives because they see conservatives as immaterial. Conservatives are like a fly. They're swatting away the fly. What they do care about is overthrowing the federal government. So they do indeed have guns.
Of course,
actually, let's just listen to that one more time, just to make sure everyone hears it.
Like where like militancy comes in, and not militancy. I think that like we have a tendency to kind of see militancy as like, oh, let's train ourselves in these different kind of like armed combat scenarios, and like let's get trained up for using guns, and let's get trained up in like martial arts and in a variety of different ways, which are of course important. But I think like there's another aspect to like military training that a lot of times I think we miss, and it's like a broader social kind of like experience of like, you know, and it's sort of like when people on the left say, oh, we're outgunned in all of these different ways, which is true. We are like literally outgunned. Campaigns are not only, they're not only done through like arms, they're done through like a social kind of like organization of armies. So not only the logistics, but also the training kind of like strategies, and how you bring people together to train them, how you feed them while they're going through this process, how you navigate like interpersonal conflict through all of those things. And so, you know, in thinking about like Bashback in particular.
Let's see, we'll get to that in one sec. Kino says, look at Antifa's gloves. It's a hard plastic motorcycle glove. Think of it as a plastic brass knuckle. Indeed, Kino, that's a really good point. Thank you for the super chat. Well, yeah, I mean, this is also a good point, Gold Becoming. I've always been skeptical of conservatives and their promise to stand up and defend you, and defend her still today. Most of them will defend their homes and rely on the military to defend us. I don't know why conservatives believe that the military is all conservative. That the kid, the Air Force guy who lit himself on fire out in front of the U.S. embassy over what's going on in Palestine. I know we've had another guy light himself on fire since then, so people may have forgotten, but there was a military guy who lit himself on fire to protest what's going on in Palestine not too long ago. He was a socialist, and he was in the Air Force. And I think there's a lot more of that than people think. We saw pictures from West Point of the graduates from West Point bragging that they're communists. So conservatives think the military is going to be on their side. I don't think the military is going to be on their side. There will be a civil war within the military.
That's where I kind of like feel like these convergences were like just the tip of the iceberg for what could have been. Like I really feel like Bashback was like an aborted movement. Like it was something that could have happened, and it just fell apart through the whole variety of like things. But you know, I think those convergences are like that kind of like component of like our, you know, the left.
Hang on. Why does the federal government capitulate to socialist ideas knowing the socialists are preparing to take them over? Matthew, the socialists have institutional power in every major institution in the country. That includes the federal government. Leftists are running the federal government, bro. And they're running the federal government from positions they can't be fired from because they have institutional power. I'm not saying everyone in the federal government is a leftist, but I'm saying there are a lot of leftists in the federal government. Why are they capitulating to socialist ideas? Because they agree with them. This is how socialists gain power, guys. The right thinks that the only type of power that's worth having is elected power. That means getting elected to a political office, but that's actually the weakest type of power there is. A much more effective type of power is to get a job, work your way up through the ranks, get yourself in a position just like Anthony Fauci did, where he was at the highest level in his organization and he could not be fired from that position. There are so many socialists and far leftists who have gotten themselves into the government and every other major institution in our society, have worked their way up for years or decades to a very high level position within the government with which they cannot be fired from. Even if Donald Trump gets elected, he's not going to be able to fire them. He couldn't fire them. This is why Trump didn't drain the swamp the first time. He could not fire them. So why are they implementing socialist policies? Because they've been working for decades to take over these institutions to gain institutional power, specifically so they could. That's what people need to be paying attention to. Elections literally mean almost nothing right now because political power is not as strong as institutional power. Political power goes. Institutional power stays.
Is very skilled in these social dynamics, far more skilled than the right, and look at how much it takes for like the police and the army to maintain their social cohesion and all of the money that goes into maintaining that, whereas we have no money and we're still more socially powerful. And so I think it's something that we need to remember about, like, you know, violence and self-defense and kind of like, you know, revolutionary, like our revolutionary potential.
I just want to add to what everyone has said, sort of the public facing side of self-defense and community defense, which I think Max articulated in a way I hadn't really thought of before, which is, you know, these are ways to bring people in, and they're also ways for people who, like, they're the journalists who are following what's going on in these anti-fascist, like the anti-fascist accounts that are like documenting who these various extremist groups are, who the individuals are, like they are doing the legwork so that we can do our job and help get that information out to even more people. I had people this summer asking me for the first time, do you think it's safe to go to Pride this year? Because they were hearing about all of these threats, including here in New York. And we had people come and harass a drag queen story hour in Queens a couple of weeks ago. So it's, you know, and when I thought of like, well, where do I send them to find out if it's safe? I was like, I think you should go to these anti-fascist Twitter accounts in New York, actually, like go see like what they are hearing, like what people feel safe sharing on Telegram, what they've seen on Telegram, like things like that, like getting that sort, it's another kind of normalization. Like this is a community resource that's here to be shared. Like, even if you might not be on the front line, like this is doing an incredible amount of community defense, even just on the level of information sharing. And I think for groups who are dealing with these attacks for like the first time, they, you know, they're doing events that have never been targeted in this way. Just knowing that other people are doing it, like other people are going through it, other people have strategies, that they're not alone in that, is very important right now. Because I think some people are just like, it never would have occurred to them that like they would be attacked in this way, like in a community setting. Like I think, you know, there's a level of constant violence that we're still experiencing as queer and trans communities, but like people who are like, we were doing a story event at a library for children. Like, why are the Proud Boys showing up and trying to destroy that? So giving people just a sense that they are part of a community, even if they haven't experienced that yet, is really important right now.
Beautiful, beautiful responses. And I encourage people to elaborate or respond to each other as you see fit. I'll ask a few questions that have come in from the audience. So here's a practical legal one. Jessica asks, as a formerly incarcerated trans woman in Washington state, my CCO tells me I'm not even allowed to possess pepper spray. After a record number of trans murders last year, I feel vulnerable. Is this even legal? I said that perhaps none of us would know. There are no lawyers in our group in terms of speaking to what's legal, but I thought with people distributing pepper spray, it might have come up at some point, sort of to what extent that's restricted for people on parole, probation, or.
And because I'm in California, I can't speak on Washington State, but I can speak to, like, well, first I want to validate your very real feelings. And even if it is legal, that's the whole point, right? Fuck the state. They're trying to make sure we out here being killed. But what I can tell you is like, and there wasn't enough in there for me to kind of like deduce this down for you, but like, depending on if it's probation or parole, you can actually find that information if you look at the terms of parole in your state or terms of probation in your state. Most of the time, that's actually not, like bear mace and things like that are big things in the areas, but like little pepper spray, no, it's usually not. But like I said, I would definitely look into the probation codes and the parole codes, just depending on what you fall within for Washington.
Great. Okay, Lane asks, can you all speak to the effectiveness of having bashback blogs or large specific affinity groups that organized actions, like some of the pros and cons of that model?
Well, I mean, I feel like we're at the point where, yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. I kind of like thought that I don't know. I kind of thought that we were going to move beyond Black Bloc by this point in the anti-fascist development. I hate to say it, but like, I just find it to be a very like reductive tactic. I kind of like felt like we would get to a point where we're like doing more fluid anonymity, or what some folks call gray bloc. And but 2020 kind of like, I just was like, oh wow, it's really back, and it's really back in full force. And I think there's pros and cons to it. A lot of the actions, the bashback actions, got the definitely like people were got the attention of law enforcement, and the FBI was tracking people, and all of that kind of stuff that's happening with Antifa right now. And you know, post 2020, I feel like a lot of people like were, you know, a lot of people blocked up for actions, and kind of like, I don't know, it's just very easy. It's not easy, but it's like law enforcement can track the people's block like fairly regularly, and you know, and so it's very difficult to kind of like, you know, wear Black Bloc and stay safe in the street, like in terms of like you're, you know, staying anonymous. So I don't know, I just think that like we just need a more,
by the way, I just want to say that's actually really good advice just in general. If you're in a major city, and I know conservatives don't like doing this because they believe that it like somehow goes against like all their moral sensibilities in the world, but if you're in a major city and Antifa's running around, and I did this several times. I did this, I remember distinctly, I did this in Washington, D.C. After the 2020 election, when I was in Washington, D.C. for the Million MAGA March. Literally, Antifa was marching up and down the middle of the street. They marched right by my hotel that night. You know what you do in order to blend in? You don't wear a fucking MAGA hat. You don't carry a Trump flag. You dress all in black, and you don't start shit with Antifa. Like, Trump supporters were so dumb. Like anytime they're around, they want to like, I don't know, they think they're going to make some sort of like social media video or something. And so they go out of their way to like be an asshole or wave their Trump flag or have all their Trump stuff or their MAGA hat and all that. You're going to get the shit kicked out of you if you do that shit. But if you're just wearing all black and you don't bother them, you're not going to stand out to them, and you're going to be more safe.
just a more like robust discussion on like how we're maintaining that anonymity and how we're blocking up and how we're kind of like appearing and disappearing for these kind of like actions. And you know, I think that like I just think that there's like some things that we could move forward in that regard. So as far as like bashback actions go,
Bro,
I don't really feel like
shut the fuck up. You are not even a real communist compared to like as far as these people are concerned. You are not part of their club, communist. I know you think you are because you read all the Bolshevik fucking literature and you have all your Bolshevik friends, but according to these people, you are not a true fucking leftist. So shut the fuck up. This is not a joke. I have watched right in front of me Antifa beating the ever-loving fuck out of people. And if you want to laugh about that, then I can just ban your ass from the chat and you won't be invited back. I don't think that people getting the shit kicked out of them is actually all that funny. Maybe you do because you don't actually care about people in the way that you claim to care about people because you're a communist. Of course you don't. You don't give a flying fuck if people starve. You don't give a flying fuck if people have to give up everything they own just to fulfill your fucking like fantasy to have some sort of utopian world that isn't even possible to change. So keep your fucking mouth shut when I'm trying to tell people how to protect themselves from getting their asses kicked by Antifa.
Like a lot of development in terms of like Black bloc or like street kind of like anonymity or things like that, but yeah, so hopefully we can move the discussion now, but always be safe on the street. Like I'm not saying like don't go unblocked ever, and there's all these, you know, safety tactics. So just my 2 cents.
I do feel like we could definitely have a lot, or like as people who are excited to see things in the street get weirder, there's a lot we can do better at in terms of like developing anonymity. But then as I kind of want to go back to the question in terms of like, is it useful to have a bashback block, not necessarily as a block of people who all dress the same, but maybe as like a block of people with similar intentions, or like a way to kind of like make an intention have like a specific geographic place. And I think that that still feels very useful, and that oftentimes people will come to demonstrations and feel very alone and like have a specific kind of intention, or like a person that a kind of person that they'd rather be around, and whether that person is dressed alike or not with them is maybe like, to me, feels less relevant than maybe like there are other ways to call for a block, being like, we want like a queer anti-capitalist block at this like May 1st demonstration, or like this
queer anti-capitalist block
for like a militant trans feminine block, or like something like that. And that can look as simple as being like, this block of people, like maybe like 4 people are gonna dedicate to like bringing like a banner that says like queers bashback, or like having a pink and black flags, just so that they can be found by other people who would like maybe be interested in like walking with them, whether it's to like get into a fight or just be around other queers or whatever. But like calling for a block in the sense of like people walking in a block, or like being together in a block, still feels very useful, although definitely we should always be stepping our game up in terms of security.
I think I'll build off of that too, of like what, like already just like these, by having them exist in the first place, whether they get called or not, what it is like creating like safe queer spaces for organizing anti-fascist tactics and building affinity and community. But like having them in places and present, it does flag for folks that it exists in our area, and when folks go out together, how they could possibly find or know that it, know that it just exists. I think like showing up presently in those ways, make sure that like queer and trans militancy is like a part of the discussion and a part of actions like towards liberation. But like but to like segue into this like idea of gray block and into these ideas of like more subtle anonymity.
Hang on, Tiff over on Rumble has a question. Is there any purpose to go to a demonstration and film it, since you're just giving them what they want, or is it best to ignore them? If you're going to go to their demonstration to film it, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I think that documenting this stuff is really important. But if you're going to go to their demonstration to film it, you need to be smart about how you're doing it. And you need to be more subtle than like walking up to someone and sticking a camera in their face and following them around and taunting them and wearing a t-shirt with like the Israeli flag on it. Like all of these agitators that are going into protest zones to like give a speech just so they can get video to look good on social media. That's stupid. That's stupid. What you need to do is dress like a normal person. No politically identifiable clothing. You need to pretend to be like watching socialism can actually help you in this because you understand how they talk. You understand like the mannerisms and stuff like that. You need to try to blend in. You need to be cordial to everyone. You need to like not be agitating, like have a hidden camera if you can have like a hidden camera. But I would not go to one of these protests and agitate. First of all, because I actually do agree with the protesters. I'm sorry. I know that pisses people off, but I'm actually on the protesters' side on this one. I think all of the like coming down on college students for expressing ideas that people disagree with is quite frankly disgusting and an attack on the First Amendment in this country. So I'm actually legitimately on their side. But all of these people that are going to these protests specifically to be agitators, they're getting what they want. They're getting surrounded by these students. Someone's going to get the shit kicked out of them. It's going to happen on camera. So I would not do that. And I would never recommend that. If you're going to go into a socialist space, be fucking chill. Be discreet. Blend in. Don't cause problems. That defeats the purpose of what you're doing. Nick says that Bash Back is a queer insurrectionist like that formed in 2007 to critique the LGBTQ movement, or excuse me, the LGBT movement that was in the mainstream. Okay, so Bash Back is how they co-opted the LGBT movement, is what you're saying. Bash Back is essentially how they co-opted the gay stuff and made it the queer stuff. That makes sense, and it happened in 2007. Not surprised. Thank you, Nick.
Like we just actually use that tactic here in California. We every year have a straight pride held in Modesto, and over the last 4 years have tried to build up a community response to successfully shut that platform down. This year was one of the best years that we've ever done it, and we did that by calling for a 9 a.m. gray block. That was well coordinated, well organized, and many affinity groups up and down were talking to be able to pull out those numbers and coordinate showing up on time together. But next thing you know, there's like over 100 gray block radical trans queer anti-fascists hanging out ready to like shut down a straight pride event. That was then, and then we had even like an 11 a.m. regular community call too, where just like regular community members got a flyer at 11 a.m. to come and show up to this event and like really hold it down with us. And then to mention like the gray block that like Pride was a Riot and the Lavender Angels in Sacramento go out and do when they're doing their queer self-defense formation. That definitely allow for folks to like be able to point them out, tell that they're them, and be able to like check in and count on them. But it just really depends, I think, on like what the block is for and like and what exactly the organized action is, right? Is it like patrolling your queer district? Is it shutting down straight pride? Is it showing up in the name of Black lives? Like what is it? And that can kind of help. But I always think I love it every time.
There are a couple of questions about disability inclusion. Morgan talked about the intense isolation of many queer disabled people around the world since the pandemic. And Tovia asked about how queer and trans self-defense can be more accessible to disabled and poor people. So I think from everyone, sort of what you see as strategies around disability inclusion and what that looks like and what that can mean.
I mean, as far as disability and kind of accessibility issues go, I just feel like I go back to the concept of like a military formation and the social aspect of it, and the understanding that there are so many different roles within actions that everybody can take part in and creatively engage in, and also like in terms of like determining targets, and in terms of like the kind of like social media constellations that these actions happen in, that, you know, all of these things are like a part of like a,
Thank you, Human
you know,
Centipede. I do actually have this on the schedule for us to look at this week, so I haven't forgotten about that. It's literally pulled up in one of my browsers, so I appreciate it.
kind of a campaign, like a military campaign or something like that. And so I just think that we're like our imagination is sort of like we're kind of like we keep hitting a brick wall in terms of like you know, just kind of like confronting these instances on the street when we see them, and not sort of like the broader like ways that we can be like training and preparing ourselves in like a broader sense, like in terms of thinking of like, you know, like how what do we want to create, how do like trainings work, how do these like all of these different things involve, like they don't involve just like, you know, just two people like fighting or like a group of people fighting. They involve so many different kind of like people and components to it. And yeah, I mean, even just like I was feeling like in 2020, like so many different actions would happen, and it's sort of like you know, the affinity groups that I saw forming would tend to focus around you know, kind of like being the most like vulgar form of like frontliners. So like holding a line of shields for like against cops or fascists or whatever. But a lot of times like those actions would forget all of the different components of making a successful march or action happen, such as like scouts, such as like evacuating people, such as medics, such as like even social media communication, like all of these different like components of it kind of like tend to fall by the wayside because we prioritize the like just this sort of like, you know, the one very visible clash. And I think we just need to like change our imagination.
Morgan, I really thank you for your question. And I think I'm going to speak on a conversation I actually just had with somebody who, so I'm a part of an abolitionist organization, very, very public, forward facing in the area.
Abolition means
who reached
prison
out
abolition.
and
was I able to check out those clips? So you sent me a clip of James Lindsay saying capitalism once, like years ago. I didn't look at it. I'm going to explain why. James Lindsay, so far as I'm concerned, does not get credit for saying capitalism and private property ownership one time in the middle of a 4-hour podcast years ago. I don't give him credit for that. And the reason that I do not give him credit for that is because I say capitalism about 87 times a day. If James Lindsay actually cared about teaching his audience that the number one enemy of the left is capitalism, which is explicitly defined as private property ownership, and I will bet you all the money in my bank account that if I listen to that clip, James is not going to tell people what private property ownership means in terms of it being your home, your land, your business, your intellectual property, your parental rights, your rental units, your individual liberties. I strongly doubt he has that definition. If he isn't repeating this every single day, then he does not care about people learning. So while I appreciate you making the clip, I really do, while I appreciate you passing it on to me, unless you have evidence that James Lindsay is saying consistently today that capitalism is defined as private property ownership, specifically what private property ownership means, how capitalism created the gender binary, how capitalism created the nuclear family, I'm just not interested. That's kind of how I feel about it. Well, you may have made the clips today, but I know exactly what the clips are from. And they're not recent.
had said that they were worried about showing up to our events because of COVID, because wondering about our pandemic safety precautions. is what they were asking about. And through this conversation, they got to kind of really inform me about how isolated they felt and how neglected they felt by folks acting like the pandemic was over. And so what we were able to do through that was like promise that our events, indoor, outdoor, all of that, we're going to, of course, continue to make sure that we were following COVID safety precautions. But I think as a movement, it is actually.
The Q was attached to the LGBT after gay marriage got legalized and they needed to transition their issue. It got co-opted after gay marriage was legalized by the queer activists, who then made everything about trans and queer, even though queer is what they really care about. As a reminder, queer is not the same thing as trans. Queer is a far left political ideology. See, I told you. I know exactly what clip you played. And listen, I'm not going to say like I don't, like, I appreciate you trying and I appreciate you having optimism. But again, if James Lindsay actually wanted to teach his audience that all of this is about capitalism, he would be doing it. And he does not get credit for saying it one time a year ago in the middle of a 4-hour podcast. Not good enough. Not remotely good enough. If James gets no credit for anything until James comes out and makes a clear and unequivocal statement that says the goal of queer theory is to abolish capitalism. It is not a Gnostic sex cult. The goal is clearly to abolish capitalism. Everything they do is about abolishing capitalism. It is not about grooming. It's not about that at all. And so if he can't come out and make that clear, unequivocal statement, James gets zero credit, and we continue to show him exactly no mercy. The Gnostic sex cult, our demand on James Lindsay is that this Gnostic sex cult bullshit be denounced, which he's never going to do. He's going to double down like a spoiled little child that is not being coddled by his mommy. But James gets no credit from us. He gets no leniency from us. He gets no mercy from us until this Gnostic sex cult bullshit is dead and buried.
On us as to realize that we are creating a space that is not safe for our for other able-bodied types and other folks in our community. Who don't feel safe, who don't even feel like they could walk up to us and tell us this because we're walking around with our masks off. And I know that there's many leftists in my area. You know, there's many community events right now in my community that are actively not encouraging masks, and therefore not creating a culture where we're doing that. And so it is kind of like the work that we're doing here. At the time I remember having the conversation. I was like, I don't know really what to do about everybody else. But the truth is being like a grassroots organizer in town, I've been doing it for so many years that I do know a lot of folks. And so actually it is on me to call my friends and be like, hey, can you make sure that there's masks at your events? You know, like, can we make sure that we're creating a space that includes our all of our brothers, sisters, and non-binary folks? Like, are we making sure that we're doing that?
Hang on, I got a super chat from Aziz saying, thank you, Aziz. Aziz has been providing us some very helpful information. Pakistani Marxist and probable atheist Dr. Masood Raj, 55,000 subs, expounds on Marxist theory on his YouTube channel. He supports the Palestinian protests. He refers to himself as a post-colonialist. That's really interesting. I'm going to take a screenshot of this, Aziz, so I remember it for later. Also, if anyone missed the stream we did yesterday, it was really interesting. We watched a presentation from Columbia University that was done right before the protests, and it was fascinating. I strongly recommend everyone go back and watch it because it completely torched the conservative narrative around what's going on about the Columbia protests.
Because because I don't even think that we know, right? It's like this privilege that we get. It like,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
saw you tweet
and
this.
had that person not come into my inbox and been like, hey,
And you're right.
I want to be able to come to your events. You're one of the only dopest abolitionist orgs in town. And I don't know if I can because I don't know what your policies and stuff are on wearing masks at the events. It was without that conversation, I wouldn't have even been able to even see that they had been so isolated from this community for years. You know, like people, the world is acting like it's going back to normal, and we have to
no
tell
one's
the world that
forcing you
it's
to be
not.
here,
We're living
bro.
in an
Leave.
endemic, and so because of it, we have to create spaces that are still acting like COVID is a very real thing. And I thank you for your question. And I'm hoping the organizers across this country and people that are watching are gonna tell their friends, hey, the next event we throw, masks, yo. And I do encourage you, Morgan, to reach out to some organizations with that question, asking how can you participate in your area?
This was in 2002, but they still very much believe all of this.
Because that was how we were able to do it, you know? And I know that puts a lot of the work on you, and that's not fair. But we start somewhere. And because that one person tapped us, we're able to like have the ripple effects are going beyond.
For me, I think, and like a more zoomed in kind of like smaller scale way, a lot of the inclusion and ability stuff came down to like,
this is what I wrote about on my Substack. You guys can head over to carlin.substack.com where I expand on this and I provide you receipts. Yes, they still believe we're in a pandemic. Yes, they really do believe that. Yes, they believe that they are protecting each other from getting sick if they wear masks. They believe in collective care. That means that everyone has collective care. Exactly. Everyone has a responsibility to everyone else. And this is not just performative. They actually do believe it. They do the same thing in their private spaces as they do publicly. They have mask mandates at their private events. They talk about why they do it at their private events behind closed doors where there's no one filming them and their identity is not in favor of getting exposed and any of that. So they really do believe it.
Small group conversations about what kinds of risks people felt okay with, what kind of like, yeah, like which kind of, because the thing is like there's a jillion different roles. There's not like one right way to like do defense or offense or whatever. And like, yeah, kind of coming from like a smaller affinity group place, like having like a less macho attitude and like having less failures of imagination and like more space for like creativity in terms of like how to move forward is like, for me, has always felt like an easier way to like break out of.
Collective care was a thing pre-pandemic. Why do you think they want universal health care?
Like a certain kind of like really rigid, like frozen idea of like what a militant is. And yeah, like having dialogue around that, like in a small group, being like able to take into consideration as many needs as possible and like how that feels like dignified or not for everyone and how that feels like worthwhile in terms of like getting this or that kind of thing done has been like one way that I've seen that addressed around me.
There's another question that came in about socialist rifle clubs and John Brown gun clubs. So those have been getting a lot of news, and what you see is the sort of relationship between the kind of
socialist rifle clubs, John Brown gun clubs. Let's listen to socialists talk about guns. Everyone paying attention?
About socialist rifle clubs and John Brown gun clubs. So those have been getting a lot of news, and what you see is the sort of relationship between the kind of different left gun club worlds and how they intersect or diverge in movements.
Absolutely, at least here. And then they're helping arm and train our queer and trans folks, as well as just members of this community. I think Sacramento's maybe, we're like a kind of a small town with a big city vibe. And so that's how we're able to like.
You mean there's socialist gun clubs in California? But I thought all those California socialists just wanted to do away with guns. Why would there possibly be socialist gun clubs in California?
Work kind of closely together. But I think that intentional outreach and working with those folks is important because not only is it like providing that community building and affinity building, but like I said, because of it, we were able to hook up our Socialist Rifleist Association, with our local queer and trans community to help them get their CCWs, to help train them on how to use their weapons, to also take them up and they go up shooting once a month, and to train them how to do that. So it's been pretty effective.
It's been very effective.
Any thoughts about the presence of firearms by leftists at protests over the last year? What's your assessment of its effectiveness, its impact, its the pros and cons of it?
Look how excited Max is.
I mean, can't
I'll
speak.
say, go ahead.
Max
Sorry,
is very
my bad.
excited.
You should go ahead.
Okay, everyone went quiet. How about Sheila T? How about you go first?
Sure. Sorry. In Philly, there hasn't been any sort of like big visible presence of firearms at demonstrations, and I don't think that means that there aren't any there. I think it means that oftentimes if like anarchists, anti-fascists, or leftists are carrying firearms, they're not making any kind of like noise about it, and they're not like...
So you're saying that when anarcho-communists, queer Marxists carry firearms at protests, they're usually not showing them off. You're saying they're doing concealed carry so that you don't know they have guns. Okay, got it.
Trying to like show them or like use them as like, I mean, like they are a deterrent, but I don't think that they're a deterrent in terms of like their visibility and how people use them here. And that's been interesting to not see, I guess. And the same has been the case during a lot of like the 2020 rioting. I think like a lot of people were carrying maybe more than showed up, and like it just never, the firearm just never came out. Like it, and I think maybe that also has to do with like how clashes get policed here, and like that, I don't know, that there's just maybe also just like already a lot of guns in Philadelphia in general, but I think it's like hard to weigh in on like whether that's effective or not or what. I think maybe like in terms of the individuals carrying and like the people around them that know that, if there's like something empowering or useful or relevant, but in terms of like materially how it's played out between different like teams clashing, it's like super invisible, and I don't even know if people are assuming it one way or the other, or like how much that plays out in terms of people's assumptions about clashes as they take place.
Abby, do you want to go?
Yeah, I feel like that's a similar story in Los Angeles too. I just, I guess I would just say like, I think that, yeah, I just think that like the escalation should be on par with like, with what's happening. And I think that, you know, I don't think that we're at a point with like gun battles or anything like that. And so I think that it's good to train for whatever and everything. But I think like, you know, I don't know, I personally kind of like look back at the Weather Underground and feel like it was sort of in like, like biting off more than they could chew and an over escalation given the context.
You think?
So, and I kind of feel like I don't really think that people are doing that.
The Weather
I
Underground was
feel
a
like
bit of
people
an
are generally
unnecessary.
like within
Yeah.
the realm of like what's happening and like the messaging and like kind of like what's going on. So I kind of feel like, you know, I don't know how long, like how long does it take to train somebody on how to use a firearm? Like, I mean, a military boot camp is like what, like 6 weeks or 8 weeks or something, like just kind of like a rudimentary one. So I'm kind of like, if things push come to shove, I feel like people could get trained up really fast. That's just my personal opinion, but I'm glad that people are learning.
I too am glad that people are learning, because I think specifically where we saw most of the guns were on the far right. Like that was where most of the guns lived during 2020. In our area, we had far right extremists who were able to walk around with their CCWs, their concealed weapons permits, and have their guns in their holster. Being able to walk right by law enforcement while giving each other hugs and high fives, you know, and the truth is that, but this is where we're at, right? Like they're bringing guns, so then therefore we feel like and these are all antagonisms and all dialectical and all how it goes, but eventually it does though. It does get to that gun battle. We have already lost lives in 2020 due to far right guns, and then any self-defense tactics. Then they were taken out by the state. You know, we saw what happened to the individual up in Washington, and so do we see a role with guns? And where are they at? I mean, they're out there. We have to decide how we want to engage in that. And we have to decide, and that's really where it is right? Like when we talk about defending our joy and organizing our rage, us as communities have to have those conversations with ourselves, being like, we know that this is coming. We know that this exists. How do we want to do this? How do we want to engage in this? And best prepare in the way that we can. But the truth is we're training folks up because that's what we're up against. We are up against death, whether that's state violence, far-right extremist violence, or climate catastrophe, which, it all leads to our death. And we absolutely have to be willing to defend ourselves. But again, like, it gets there. We have to name that. We have to be willing to name that as a movement. We have to say that out loud. It's going to get to gun battles. And do we want to get to gun battles? I don't think we do. That's not really that's not really our goal when we say housing is a human right, food for all, education for everybody.
It's going to get to gun battles. You want to know why it's going to get to gun battles? Because at some point, in order to institute housing as a human right, in order to institute food for everyone, in order to institute universal health care, in order to institute energy for everyone, which means the government controls all the energy, in order to institute all of their crazy plans, they need to take over the federal government. They are not going to take over the federal government through the electoral process because they don't believe in the electoral process. There is going to have to be a violent revolution. It's not going to come until the very end, I don't think. But they're already planning, like, there are going to be gun battles. Well, why are there going to be gun battles? The right is lazy. The right is never going to start this. They're going to start it because they cannot achieve their goal unless they violently overthrow the federal government. Yeah. This isn't really happening, conservatives. Exactly.
We're not trying to do that at gunpoint,
Radical moderate, I'll look her up. Thank you.
That's just all I have to say. Is like we have to name it. We have to name that it's a time. It's a matter of time. It's not even like decades off. It's like years off. And we're here now. So
I just wanted to add something quick on Texas. Speaking of where the guns are, and also a state where you barely need anything to carry a gun, I think at this point, with constitutional carry. And I've certainly, of all of the sort of events over the summer and into the fall that I've been following, it seems like the Elm Fork John Brown Club is super present at many of the these like counter protests or demos to sort of physically block the far right groups from either messing with people in the community, whether that's like, you know, escorting people to their car or standing in front of a venue to, you know, kind of be a physical block, whether or not they're even caring, like they're like very much there like as a group. And so I'm wondering, Alvi, if that's sort of connected to some of the things you were talking about in terms of like group cohesion, like is there a role to play for these groups in sort of having those like cohesive groups who are kind of like ready to roll? And in the case of Texas, you know, there are definitely guns present on the side of the far right openly. So it might be a different dynamic. And certainly like it hasn't come to the point yet where people are actually like engaged in gun battles, but I think it's sort of, it's not expected. Like I think like I've seen some very strange responses from the far.
This is interesting because I was actually just looking at the Justice Center's YouTube channel the other day, like that at Columbia University. Kathy Bowden, founding member of the Weather Underground, became an adjunct professor at Columbia University and founded the Justice Center at Columbia. Imagine my shock. Thank you, Radical Moderate. Appreciate it.
Right to like the Elm Fork John Brown Club in particular, and just sort of like weird macho posturing about guns, sort of in response to like, oh, Antifa, they can't be macho enough to carry guns. It seems like on a certain level it messes with them, but on another level, like people in community are seeing that like there is somebody here who is like armed, who will walk them to their car or prevent somebody from entering a venue who might harm them.
Did you have something you wanted to add, LV?
Yes.
I just
hang on. Yes, Kelly, we are well aware that most conservatives are lazy. We are well aware that most conservatives just want to spend time on Twitter complaining about all the things they don't like in the world and saying things like 1776 and Civil War. We're aware. We're aware. We're aware that conservatives will never lift a finger to actually do anything. We're aware that conservatives would rather sit in their easy chair watching the football game than they would actually do anything to stop the Marxist cultural revolution. We are well aware that conservatives are never going to do the Civil War that they keep threatening they're going to do. We know. We know that conservatives would rather let the Marxists win than do anything productive. We know. We know. Believe me, we know. What type of beer am I drinking? This is the Endless Ride Kettle Sour Ale with blueberry and lemon zest. And I bought this one because I really thought the can was very, very pretty. And it's a good beer too. It's pink. Well, very dark pink.
I think that like numbers are our biggest strength. And I just feel like when I think about conflict mediation, and I'm not talking about de-escalating or street conflicts or anything like that, I'm like just talking about conflict mediation among our comrades. Like I feel like the more that I work on that, the more that I realize how much like effort and skills and just kind of like training goes into just getting along with our comrades. And so it's like you have you'll have a conflict between two different comrades, but it really is a conflict between like their friends and like other friends, and like it's a whole constellation of that. So even just like checking in with everybody about what's going on with that conflict is like hours and hours of emotional labor, not to mention like thinking through like,
because Human Centipede has been going above and beyond the Call of Duty lately, and Human Centipede has been finding some of the best stuff for us to watch, I am hereby bestowing moderator responsibility on Human Centipede. Human Centipede now has a wrench. If Human Centipede wants to put someone in a timeout for being a pain in the ass, he now has that ability, Milton. So, for services rendered, Human Centipede gets a wrench.
Responses to someone's trauma, responses to how to help somebody through all of the different kind of like therapeutic or just like logistical forces that put somebody in a place where they can't resolve a conflict with their comrade, or like, and I'm not even talking about like interpersonal violence, like sexual assault and things like that, which is like even more complicated and takes even more resources. And so like when I spend time in the communities I spend time in, it's sort of like, radical communities, it's like, we don't have any resources around that. Like, it's very like taxing. These things are taxing. So when I think about like training around guns or something, I feel like, it's totally great and we should all do that. However, there's like, we have a gaping wound we have just this gaping wound in our communities that we have not like resolved. We don't have the resources around, we have not organized the resources around solving those kind of things. And I feel like, to me, that's like every project that we start, like it gets destroyed by interpersonal conflict. And it's just time and time again. And it's like, when are we going to learn the lesson that it's sort of like when, for example, we've gotten really good on, in the revolutionary left around like feeding mass groups of people, 500 people or whatever.
Let's see. We got a super chat from Rottweiler. Conservatives are only good for complaining about OnlyFans, anime, games, hot calendars, and abortion, which means they will never win an election again. Indeed, Rottweiler. Indeed. Hey, shout out Donnie. Welcome, Donnie the Don. All right, guys, we have about 10 minutes left of this presentation. So I want to thank everyone joining me for Socialism Saturday for this week. I think watching this presentation again, I think was a really good idea. I definitely heard more than I did the first time. So I think we got some good clips. I've been marking them. And so that's really good. As a reminder, we do Socialism Saturday every Saturday at 6 p.m. Normally, I stream Monday through Friday throughout the week at 5 p.m. Eastern time. So please come and join me for one of my daily streams. We also do deep dives on those streams, but the content tends to be a little bit lighter Monday through Friday. Saturdays are for the good, heavy socialism content. Also, as a reminder, please head over to my Substack, Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. If you want to support the work I'm doing, you can sign up for free email updates, but you can also sign up to support the work for $8 a month, $80 a year, which keeps me in business, because the only reason I have 3 hours to spend on a Saturday with you guys is because you pay me to do it. I'm not funded by anywhere else. I'm not funded by big political funders. My only job is to tell you the truth and to show you the receipts. I cannot do it without you. And for my supporters, we do movie night on Sunday. As a reminder, movie night is going to start at 6 p.m. tomorrow in the supporter Discord. I will be sending out information on how to join the Discord prior to movie night. So sign up to the Substack and you'll get access to that. But 6 p.m. because we're doing a Hunger Games double feature, Hunger Games 1 and 2. Don't be late. Well, you can come in and leave anytime, but we're starting the movie at 6 p.m. All right? Because I want to go to bed at some point tomorrow night. Anyway, guys, mount the like button if you have not already. Please make sure you are subscribed on whatever platform you're watching on. And let's finish this up.
And it's like, we know that all of the logistics that it takes to like get the food, cook the food, like have the recipes, serve the food, like all of these different aspects. And yet when it comes to interpersonal conflict, we don't approach it with that kind of rigor. And that's where I kind of feel like, our real effort should, that's where I'm talking about like the kind of like socializing of like a military response. Sort of like that's the kind of like social dimension that I think that we like, that is.
Well, just like the socialists, self-funding is the only way my work isn't going to be corrupted. I'm not going to become the next James Lindsay. In fact, to play us out tonight when this is all done, let's listen to my James Lindsay song again, because like I never want to sell out to the political machine like James Lindsay did, like Dave Rubin did, like Christopher Rufo did, like basically every conservative influencer ever did. So, yeah, I am self-funded. And that's why I get to tell you guys the truth. And I will never sell pillows. Although I might sell coffee. I can sell coffee in my merch store now. True story.
Is really important to to take seriously when we're talking about like queer, like violence, queer self-defense, and like all of those things?
Over the last 10 minutes that we have, I want to focus us in on what we see as the potential for new formations and strategies. People have spoken to this in various ways. LV, you talked about Bashback being an aborted attempt and our project, and some of the conflict mediation stuff you're thinking about. Max, you referred a little bit, gestured to a future horizon and the kinds of formations that might be appropriate. I know you have a little bit to say about this, Melissa. So let's close out in doing a go around and us all speaking to this.
I can start. I don't have a ton to say because I feel like everyone's covered a lot of what it takes to build these formations. And I like, that was exactly kind of what I wanted to hear, Al, like the sense that like, before you're like taking up arms, like what are you doing actually to like strengthen the group? What are you doing to sort of build those resources that people have? Like it doesn't make any sense to go to that level of escalation if the group actually isn't connected and isn't caring for one another in a way and doesn't have those resources. I've been going back and forth, like in what I'm seeing, like part of me feels like we're in a moment where it's like all hands on deck, lots of strategies are in play, lots of different people are like tangling with this question right now, like how do you respond when the far right shows up? And there's so much, institutional knowledge among anti-fascists on how to do that. What I've been seeing over the last couple of months, like for example, in Idaho, this was where the Patriot Front showed up in a U-Haul and were arrested, 31 of them, before the Pride event. But it ended up almost, for the people there, like they had a whole other plan that was actually what they were focused on that day in terms of creating a safe space for folks, having big banners to block people who were trying to like record people and things like that. But it was an interesting moment to watch sort of like, the 501c3 universe of queer and trans life negotiate how do you work with anti-fascist activists and like what are we comfortable with, groups who are mostly just going to call the cops to report things, realizing that that is not a safe strategy. And I think particularly after 2020 has attuned people to looking for safety outside of policing. So I'm it's hard to say I'm optimistic about anything, but like I'm seeing those as like very productive tensions of people sort of like working out like what tools do we have to respond that aren't law enforcement, what capacities do we have for people who maybe aren't politically aligned with us, but like are the ones who are showing up and getting it done. Like you were saying in the beginning, the kind of like liberals who are just like had never considered, anything like direct action or self-defense, seeing like what the need is in their community and seeing who's showing up. And, if that's like folks at the farmer's market, which I love as an entry point, or people just like all of a sudden following a zillion anti-fascist researchers on Twitter, which other folks are doing, like I think this is a potentially community building moment on that side.
I think for me, what feels most exciting about new formations isn't like any specific kind of like model or like style of organizing. I think like that people are getting excited to try to get things done at all is more exciting to me. Like I don't care if someone starts a gang or an affinity group or like a syndicate or whatever, like so all these like specific formation styles are so contextual, and I don't think that there's like a right one for any one context necessarily, but like thinking through that, like people are thinking through that they want to do a specific thing, they want to get together with other people to get it done, and like how can they do that feels maybe like the most exciting to me, or like the one that I feel like is going to be as flexible as it needs to be anyway, and like that I look forward to the most.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like feel like I sort of outlined some of the things that I feel about like what would be great to see in the next year or
Wait.
few years. I think also in addition,
Did Human Centipede already time out Donnie the Dawn? Human Centipede, I gave you a wrench like less than an hour ago, and you've already timed out Donnie the Dawn. Okay, we're gonna chalk that up to a mistake.
into kind of like this social sort of like understanding of like the component of violence. I also just think like loudly proclaiming that like violence is a part of our revolutionary like imagination, and like yes, self-defense, but also like violence does happen. It is part of like consequences to navigating conflict, and
Yeah.
and I think that
Yeah.
like not
Power
shying
corrupts.
away from that is important. And I also think that really like, especially for folks that are kind of like seeking out a conversation along this, are probably folks that are more drawn to building that kind of like social capacity. So I would just encourage all of us to like seek out those folks that have already kind of like committed these acts of like self-defense, queer violence, like other things like that, and are getting.
Donnie, have you seen my song about James? We're gonna watch the song again after this is over to play us out tonight. But if you haven't yet heard my song about James, you're in for a treat.
Caught up in different kind of like charges or being doxxed by fascists or other things like that, and really think about how we can very, very materially support them in different capacities. Because I also think like that was one of the things that Bashback was really important for, was when people take those actions, we're there to have their back, and you know, unconditionally almost. And so, you know, there was a number of targets that I remember having conversations with people about in the late 2000s, where people were like, oh, that wasn't the target I would have chosen. I don't think that we should support X, Y, or Z. But like, really, like, I just think that, you know, we need to be there for each other. And like, people get caught up, and the fascists are going to find the most vulnerable among us and take them down, and use them as examples for the rest of us. And we need to push back against that at every opportunity.
Max, do you want to close us out and saying what we should do for the future?
Yeah, I mean, and I think y'all everybody kind of touched on it, and that's, but the truth is I'm like most excited because that's what we are in, y'all. We are in this like programmatic, pragmatic stage of like, what do we do as like as a people, not even just like as a movement, but like as a people, right? As again, we try to talk about understanding the devastation around us, and we are trying to come up with figuring that out. And I think like LV, you tapped it right on the head. The most important thing that we need to begin to do is address the gaping wound. I mean, like what we've seen over and over again. And I think didn't the FBI do a whole report on the Twitter war and the shit talking that people were doing in Seattle? Like they were like just watching our Twitter beefs online and stuff like that, about like, what do we do in the inevitability of conflict? You know what I mean? It is not something that we could ever avoid. Like literally, that's where evolution comes from. You need conflict on even down to a cellular level in order for change to occur. And how we actually embrace that stuff, instead of it being something that like devastates, is something that we absolutely have to get better at. When we talk about another world as possible, when we talk about what a vision looks like and what the world can be, it looks like us being able to like actively speaking my boundaries, and you affirmatively speaking my boundaries, and people actively listening to them, and back and forth. But until we can begin to like mediate the harm that we're causing as we're unlearning all this toxic shit, and we're enacting all of these toxic things on each other as we're trying to build towards liberation, then all we're going to do is have to start over again every single time. And it's going to weaken our movement every single time. And something else I just want to pop into these questions that I saw real quick. And somebody spoke about like what else we'll do around the existing culture and structures because of concerns of anonymity. Somebody was like, hey, sometimes it prevents folks from getting involved. Something that I would love for us to do in the future is to make ourselves more accessible to our community, make our thought processes more accessible to our community. And then for us to name out loud that it takes time to trust build, it takes time to relationship build, it takes time to community build. And so your automatic want to hop into an organization where they're like, oh, we don't know you, has to be taken kindly. But also this organization needs to be like, how are we making this successful? How are we making a space to trust build with this person, with this community, and vice versa? Which then will lead us to having conversations about how do we address the gaping wound that is that we don't know how to navigate conflict in our movement, you know? And so those are really the two things that I really absolutely feel are the biggest and are in the directions we're going. Even the fact that every single panelist on this call today talked about it means that y'all who are watching this today are probably thinking about it. And therefore, there are many, many, many people in this movement having this conversation amongst themselves. You can give thanks for that. I give thanks for that we are trying to figure it out. But like, I think that that's where our focus should be. Gaping holes and addressing our and how we allow for community members who are brand new to this to come in and learn and not allow for our fear of being like sacrificed to the cops, you know, keep us from teaching people what the fuck security culture is.
Beautifully said. Well, just a magnificent discussion tonight. You are such brilliant people, and I hope I get to count you all as comrades.
Yes, Emmy, we hope you get to count them all as comrades as well. Guys, that concludes our night. I think we got a lot of great clips tonight. We had a lot of great discussion. Now, again, one more time, as a reminder, please head over to my Substack, Karlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. I've got some stuff I'm going to be posting on there tonight, so you can at least sign up for email updates for free. But if you do want to support the work I'm doing, sign up for a membership, $8 a month, $80 a year. You will be getting a newsletter tomorrow. Come join us in the supporter Discord for movie night at 6 p.m. You can also join our community Zoom calls Mondays at 7 p.m., Wednesdays at noon. We've got some great spy streams that we did this week that I haven't made clips for yet, but like we went inside a queer liberation training at the California community colleges. That was pretty great. You're going to get access to that. Lots of other great stuff for supporters. And before we wrap up tonight, we're going to play out my James Lindsay song, Gnostic Sex Cult. And I just want to highlight Reagan, because Reagan actually went through the trouble of making a lyric sheet for this song. So if you want to follow along with the lyrics, I put the pin to Reagan's tweet at the top of the chat so you can find the lyrics. And I just wanted to let everyone know, the song is pinned to the top of my Twitter currently. Now, I am working on getting it into Spotify and iTunes. I submitted it earlier, so you are going to be able to get it on Spotify and iTunes eventually. But for right now, it is pinned to the top of my Twitter. And if you want to share the song, and if you want to tag James's Twitter account in it if he hasn't blocked you yet, I'm not going to say don't do that. I think that I'm very proud of my work on this song, and I would like as many people to hear it as possible. So let's play it out tonight, guys. We'll have an encore presentation. I will be back on Monday at 5 p.m., but I will see those of you who are coming to movie night later. Thanks for joining me. Take care, and we'll see you next time.
James Lindsay is obsessed with lying to his audience. Well, crazy things can he get them to believe? He does it irresponsibly to pocket all that money from the Mills for Liberty. The left hates capitalism, but James won't admit it. He refuses to believe queer theory destabilizes normativity, gender binary, and the nuclear family. James blocks the truth, smears people who try to show him, creates an echo chamber for himself to reinforce his fantasy. He used to believe in something, what happened? Mills for Liberty. Gnostic sex cult, building his own world. A Gnostic sex cult, 1 inch from reality, totally lost it. What can we do but mock him relentlessly? It's not a Gnostic sex cult, James. No, it's not. Stop lying to your audience. No, it's not. It's not. wearing nothing, he tells us. Queer liberation means the annihilation of capitalism. Catch up, change, whiteness means capitalism. Queer theory hates capitalism. Whiteness means capitalism. Queer theory hates capitalism. Whiteness means capitalism. It's all about capitalism. Everyone knows it's capitalism. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, James. It's capitalism. Whoa. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, James. It's capitalism. It's all about capitalism. Everyone knows it's capitalism. The socialists know it's capitalism. Wake up, James. It's capitalism. It's capitalism. To pocket all that money from the mills for liberty. Capitalism, but James won't admit it. He refuses to believe queer theory stabilizes normativity, gender binary, and the nuclear family. But James blocks the truth, smears people who try to show him, creates an echo chamber for himself to reinforce his fantasy. To believe in something, what happens for liberty? Gnostic sex cult building his own world. Gnostic sex cult unhinged from reality. He's totally lost it. What can we do but mock him relentlessly?